Hey everyone, welcome to Dr. Sleep. We love creating unique content for you, but we need your support now more than ever. Our channel is facing some challenges, and we really need your interaction. If you enjoy what we offer, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share our videos with your friends. Every comment, like, and share makes a huge difference. Let's grow together and keep bringing you the content you care about. Thank you for your continued support. Officer Carter had dealt with his fair share of strange calls, wild animal sightings, trespassers, even the occasional ghost story spun by an old-timer who'd had one too many drinks. He'd learned to take them all with a grain of salt. But this one felt different. The man on the other end of the line sounded wrong. His voice wavered, teetering on the edge of panic, as if he were forcing himself to keep it steady. "It's not an animal," the man said. His name was Isaac Begay, a Navajo rancher who lived miles away from anything resembling civilization. "It watches from the trees, and it smiles." Carter rubbed at his temple, suppressing a sigh. Probably just a mountain lion, maybe a particularly bold coyote. He had seen enough scared families who mistook wild animals for something worse. Still, it was his job to check it out. "Has anyone been hurt?" he asked, flipping open his notepad. A pause. "No, but it's getting closer." The way he said it sent a sliver of unease down Carter's spine. "Closer?" Another pause, then quieter. "It was in the field last night, near the fence line, watching my house. It took 2 of my goats, no blood, no tracks, just gone." Carter frowned. A predator would leave remains, torn flesh, bones scattered in the dirt. But total disappearance? That was strange. Isaac exhaled heavily, as if choosing his next words carefully. "And tonight," he whispered, "it's at the trees. I can see it. I swear to God, it's watching me right now." Carter's grip on the receiver tightened. "What exactly are you seeing?" Another moment of silence. Then finally, eyes and a smile. The line went dead. Carter sat there for a moment, the unease gnawing at him. Ranchers didn't spook easily. If Isaac was afraid, then something was really out there. Outside, the desert night stretched endlessly, stars like pinpricks of silver over an ocean of black. The land was old out here, untouched in places, still belonging to something ancient and unknown. Carter grabbed his keys. Whatever was out there, mountain lion, coyote, or something else, it was his job to find out. He drove out toward the Begay Ranch, headlights cutting through the darkness, the hum of the road beneath him the only sound. The night felt too still, the usual chirping of crickets absent. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote should have howled. But the land was silent. Up ahead, the ranch came into view. A modest house, a few sheds, and beyond it, the dark line of trees. Carter's gut tightened. Isaac had said it was watching from the trees, and something was. 2 glowing yellow eyes staring at him from the tall grass, unblinking. Carter slammed the brakes. The thing didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Hand shaking slightly, he reached for his flashlight, clicked it on, and aimed the beam straight at the eyes. The grass rustled, and the eyes were gone. Carter's heartbeat pounded in his ears. The glow of those yellow eyes was seared into his mind, even though they were now gone. He kept the flashlight trained on the spot where they had been. The grass still swayed slightly, disturbed by whatever had been lurking there. A coyote, maybe? A bobcat? Their eyes sometimes caught the light like that. But there was no sound of retreat, no rustling of underbrush, no patter of paws through the dirt. Just the wind, dry and whispering through the empty landscape. Carter swallowed hard and stepped out of the cruiser, his boots crunching against the dirt road. The flashlight beam swept over the area. Nothing, no animal tracks, no sign of movement. He inhaled deeply, forcing himself to push down the unease rising in his chest. He had a job to do. Turning back toward the house, he noticed the front door cracked open. A single light flickered in the window. The whole house looked tense. It wasn't something he could explain, just a feeling, like the very walls had drawn in tight, bracing themselves. He made his way up the porch steps and knocked. A long pause. Then the door creaked open wider, revealing Isaac Begay. The man was tall and lean, with deep lines carved into his face from years of hard work under the sun. But right now he looked older, worn. His eyes were shadowed, his mouth a thin line of worry. "You called about something watching your property," Carter said, keeping his voice calm. "Can you tell me exactly what's been happening?" Isaac stepped aside, motioning him in. Carter hesitated, just for a second. Something in the air felt off, like stepping into a room where someone had just been talking about you. Still, he stepped inside. The house was dimly lit, the single overhead bulb casting long shadows across the wooden floor. The smell of burning sage lingered in the air. In the corner, Isaac's wife Lena sat rigid in a chair, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her gaze flicked to Carter but didn't linger. She looked afraid. Their son, a boy no older than 6, sat on the floor near the fireplace, dragging his finger through the dust on the wooden planks. He didn't look up as Carter entered. "Show him," Isaac said quietly. The boy hesitated. Then with slow, deliberate movements, he scratched one final mark into the dust and scooted back. Carter stepped closer and felt the first real chill of fear. The drawing was crude but unmistakable. A tall, twisted figure, hunched over on all fours, long limbs, elongated fingers, and the face, grinning, wide and sharp, stretching from one side of its head to the other. The boy's hand hovered over the image for a moment, then he whispered, barely loud enough to hear, "It's outside." Carter turned sharply toward the window. The fields beyond were nothing but shadow, but for a moment, just a moment, he swore he saw it. 2 pinpricks of yellow light deep within the tree line, watching and smiling. Carter's fingers hovered over the grip of his gun, an old instinct kicking in, but he didn't draw it, not yet. Through the window, the trees stood like jagged black teeth against the night sky, motionless in the dead air. Whatever had been watching them was gone, or hiding. He turned back to Isaac. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." Isaac exhaled slowly, rubbing his face with a calloused hand. "Started about a week ago. First it was little things. Livestock going missing. Fence posts snapped like they were nothing. I thought maybe coyotes or..." He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Or people. But then I saw it." He gestured toward the boy's drawing. "Out past the barn one night, tall, thin, on all fours, but wrong." His voice lowered. "It didn't move right, like its bones were loose. It would jerk, then stop, like it was figuring out how to use its own body." Carter frowned. "What about its face?" Isaac's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Didn't see it, not then. It wouldn't come close at first, just watched." Lena finally spoke, her voice hoarse. "It's learning us." Carter glanced at her. "What do you mean?" She shook her head. "It stands in the trees, listens. We hear it sometimes, moving, mimicking. It repeats things we say to each other, but..." She swallowed hard. "Not quite right." A cold weight settled in Carter's gut. Isaac continued. 2 nights ago, I heard it outside our bedroom window. I got up, rifle in hand, and that's when I saw it." He looked at Carter then, something raw and broken in his expression. It was smiling. A beat of silence passed between them. Carter felt the weight of the house pressing in on him, the air thick with something unseen, and then he noticed it, the quiet, not just inside the house, but outside. No insects, no wind, no rustling leaves. Even in the dead of night, the desert was never truly silent. The wind always whispered through the dry grass. Crickets chirped. The distant yips of coyotes echoed. But now, nothing. The world was holding its breath. Carter clenched his jaw. He had never heard a silence like this. Not in all his years patrolling these remote lands. It felt wrong, as if the land itself was trying to stay unnoticed. The boy was still drawing in the dust, slow and methodical. But this time he wasn't sketching the creature. He was drawing the house. And outside the house, just beneath the window, he scratched 2 glowing circles into the dirt. Carter's breath hitched. The boy looked up at him then, wide-eyed. "It's here." The front door creaked. Something was outside. The door groaned, the sound slow and deliberate, as if something was testing it. Carter's hand was on his gun now, fingers tightening around the grip. The boy's drawing sat between them, the twin circles, eyes, etched in the dust just beneath the crude outline of the house. Isaac grabbed his rifle from where it rested against the wall, moving with the quiet precision of a man who had seen his fair share of trouble. Lena remained frozen in her chair, staring at the door, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Carter stepped forward slowly. He reached for the doorknob, resting his palm against the wood first, feeling for vibrations. Nothing. And then, a sharp tap against the window. Not a knock. Not the hesitant sound of fingers testing the glass. It was harder, heavier, like something pressing too firmly, feeling the barrier between them. The boy whimpered, shrinking back into his mother's arms. Carter flicked his head toward Isaac. "Lights off. Now." Isaac hesitated but moved quickly, flipping the switch. The house was plunged into darkness. The only illumination came from the dim glow of the moon seeping through the curtains. Another tap. Carter edged toward the window, rifle raised, pressing himself against the wall just beneath it. He inhaled deeply, then in one swift motion yanked the curtain aside and raised his gun. Nothing. And then, a faint, scuffling sound. Carter's breath hitched. It came from near the barn, low and scraping, like something dragging itself across dry earth. He aimed his flashlight in the direction of the noise. The beam flickered slightly, the light cutting through the night, landing on nothing. The barn door was ajar, swaying just slightly, though there was no wind. "Stay inside," Carter murmured, his voice firm. "Lock the door." Isaac hesitated, but Lena was already grabbing their son, pulling him back. Carter stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked under his weight, the sound swallowed instantly by the unnatural stillness. His gut told him not to go near that barn, but he needed proof. His cruiser was parked a few yards away, its headlights still cutting across the dirt road. He moved quickly, boots crunching against the dry earth, and popped the trunk. Inside were 2 motion-activated trail cameras, standard issue for property disputes and poaching cases. They weren't military grade, but they'd do the job. He grabbed them, along with a small toolkit, and turned back to the house. Isaac had stepped outside, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the property. "We're setting these up," Carter told him, "around the house and the barn. I want to see what the hell we're dealing with." Isaac nodded once. He didn't ask questions. They worked in silence, placing the cameras at key points, one near the barn, another on the front porch, one at the tree line where the thing had been seen. As Carter finished adjusting the final camera near the barn, he felt it again. The sensation of being watched. Slowly he turned his head toward the trees. The flashlight beam wavered slightly as it passed over the gnarled branches. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, twisting where they shouldn't. The trees loomed, motionless, then movement. His breath caught. Just for a second, between the trunks, something shifted. A tall, thin silhouette, barely visible, crouched low like a predator in wait. Then it was gone. Carter exhaled sharply, stepping back. He didn't know what unsettled him more, the figure itself or the way it moved. It didn't retreat or run. It simply shifted, like it had never been there at all. He swallowed hard and forced himself back toward the house. Inside the cruiser, he powered up his laptop and connected the cameras. A live feed flickered to life on the screen. The barn, the tree line, the porch, all still. Minutes passed. Carter kept his eyes glued to the screen, watching. And then, a flicker. His jaw clenched. One of the cameras, the one near the barn, had caught something. A blur of movement. He rewound the footage, pressed play. The screen showed the empty barn door still swaying slightly. Then, there, a figure, moving so fast it was barely more than a smear against the dirt. Thin, long-limbed, sprinting on all fours with impossible speed. Then it was gone. Carter's stomach turned. He hit rewind, watched again. The figure appeared, moved, vanished. And when he rewound again, it wasn't there at all, like it had never been caught on film to begin with. The cruiser radio crackled to life. A voice came through. Isaac's voice. "Officer, you need to come inside now." Carter's head snapped toward the house. The radio crackled again. "Officer, you need to come inside now." The exact same words, the exact same tone, and then, from the house, the exact same voice, calling him inside. Carter's fingers hovered over his radio, his breath coming slow and measured. His training kicked in. Assess, don't react. His eyes flicked between the glowing screen of his laptop, now useless, and the house behind him. "Officer, you need to come inside now." The voice crackled through the radio again, but this time he noticed something. It wasn't quite right. It had all the right parts, the cadence, the inflection, but there was something off. It was too even, too measured, like someone reading from a script but not quite understanding the words. And then, from the house, Isaac's real voice rang out, filled with panic. "Carter, don't come inside." Carter's grip on his gun tightened. Two voices, identical. One inside, one on the radio. His mind raced. If the real Isaac was inside, then whoever or whatever was on the radio. A movement caught his eye. At the edge of the trees, just beyond the range of his cruiser's headlights, something shifted. It was barely a silhouette against the night, its outline flickering like a heat mirage. And then, for the briefest second, the light from his cruiser caught it just right. A body too long, joints bending the wrong way, a head cocked at an unnatural angle, and that smile. Carter clenched his jaw, stepping back toward the house. He kept his gun trained on the figure, but his gut told him bullets wouldn't do much. Not against something like this. The radio crackled again. "Come inside, officer." Isaac's voice again, but there was something new in it this time. A hint of a smirk, like it was playing with him. Carter slammed the door shut behind him, locking it. Inside, Isaac and Lena were backed against the far wall, the boy clinging to his mother's leg. "You heard it, didn't you?" Isaac whispered. Carter nodded, his heart hammering. "It's copying you." Lena shuddered. "It's been doing that for days. The first time it only repeated things we'd already said. But now—" her voice dropped to a whisper. "Now it knows." Carter peered out the window again, but the figure was gone. The radio crackled once more. "You should really come outside." The voice was smoother now, less of an imitation, more practiced. Carter shut the radio off. Whatever was out there wasn't just copying them, it was becoming them. A low noise filled the house then, not from the radio, but from just outside the door. A soft, rhythmic clicking sound, like something tapping its fingernails against the wood. And then, "Officer, let us in." Not Isaac's voice, not Lena's, not the boy's. The words were coming from multiple voices at once, layered on top of each other. The sound of an entire family speaking in unison. "Let us in, officer, we're cold." Isaac clutched his rifle tighter. "That's not us." Carter took a slow step toward the door, his stomach twisting. Through the peephole he saw them. Isaac, Lena, the boy, standing on the porch. All three of them, smiling, too still, too stiff, their eyes shining too bright in the darkness. His gut screamed at him to run. Carter's breath came shallow as he stared through the peephole. The family outside looked real, down to the wrinkles in Isaac's weathered face, the soft sway of Lena's dark hair in the breeze, the boy's small, dust-covered hands. But their movements were too controlled. No nervous shifting, no blinking, no breathing, just standing, just smiling. "Come inside, officer." The voice wasn't coming from their mouths. It hung in the air as if whispered from behind them, moving through their bodies like a puppeteer's strings. Carter took a slow step back, gun raised. "Isaac," he said over his shoulder, voice tight, "get your son and your wife upstairs, now." Isaac didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed Lena by the arm, pulling her and the boy toward the staircase. The boy turned back, eyes wide. "They're not us," he whispered. Carter nodded. Outside, the copies didn't react. They just stood there, watching. And then, without warning, they moved. Not walked, not ran. Dropped. Like marionettes whose strings had been cut, they collapsed onto all fours, their limbs jerking unnaturally, their heads twisting too far. Carter's stomach clenched. The boys drawing. The creature hadn't been standing upright. It had been crawling. A deep, awful crack echoed as the Lena thing twisted its neck at an impossible angle, that smile still stretching, widening. Then the three figures skittered forward. Carter jumped back as they broke open the door. Carter didn't hesitate. He fired. The bullet ripped through Isaac's copy, sending it lurching back, limbs spasming. But it didn't bleed. It barely reacted, just jerked to a stop like a machine resetting itself. Carter fired again. This time, Lena's copy dropped flat to the dirt, twisting unnaturally to avoid the shot, its head rotating toward him even as its body slithered forward. They were getting closer. Carter took another step back. Then, Heavy footsteps behind him, not from the stairs, from inside the house. Something else was here, something that had never needed to knock. The real threat wasn't outside, it was inside with them. Carter spun, gun raised, scanning the dimly lit room. The door was still locked, the windows shut. But he felt it. Something was here. Upstairs, the floor creaked as Isaac and his family moved toward the bedroom. A heavy silence followed. Then, thump. A single, deliberate step. Not from upstairs. From the hallway leading to the back of the house. Carter's grip tightened around the gun. He moved slowly, his boots barely making a sound against the wooden floor. The dim hallway stretched before him, the door at the end slightly ajar. A shadow flickered across the gap. "Where's your son?" he had asked outside. "Inside," the fake Lena had answered. But the boy's last drawing had told a different story. Carter swallowed hard. If the drawings were right, the family outside wasn't real. Which meant the real family was already gone. A cold dread curled in his stomach. "Isaac," he called, stepping back toward the stairs. No answer. He took the steps two at a time, reaching the landing just as the bedroom door swung open. Isaac stood there, rifle aimed at him. For a split second, Carter's heart pounded, until he saw the terror in Isaac's face. "They're not us," he breathed. Carter barely had time to register the words before Lena stepped into view behind her husband. But something was wrong. Her face was off. The skin around her mouth was stretched too wide, her lips barely covering her teeth, and her eyes, too bright, too knowing. And then she grinned. "Come inside, officer." Carter's blood ran ice cold. Isaac turned, just in time for Lena's arms to snap unnaturally around his neck, her fingers digging deep into his flesh. His eyes widened in pain, but his voice never made it out. Carter raised his gun, but Isaac's son was behind him, smiling. The child moved first. His small, unnatural fingers lunged for Carter's throat. Carter barely dodged in time, stumbling backward, his mind screaming. Isaac was right. The real family had been gone for hours. What was left of them was just another imitation, and now it wanted him. Carter didn't think, he moved. He barely dodged as the boy thing lunged again, its small hands grasping at his throat with an unnatural, jerky speed. He stumbled back, raising his gun, but the thing wearing Lena's face tilted its head, stepping toward Carter, her arms still stretched too long from where she'd snapped them around her husband's throat. Isaac lay on the ground, unmoving. Not dead. Not yet. Carter fired. The shot slammed into the Lena thing's shoulder, sending it staggering back, but it didn't make a sound. No grunt of pain, no scream. Just a slight twitch like a puppet string being pulled the wrong way. Then it smiled wider. The fake Isaac dropped onto all fours in a single, sickening movement, his limbs snapping into place with sharp, wet cracks. And then they rushed him. Carter fired again, the shot punching into Isaac's stomach, but the thing didn't slow down. It moved too fast. He barely had time to register the motion before the boy copy was already at his side, grabbing his wrist. The touch was wrong, not warm, not cold, just empty, like pressing his skin against a mannequin. Carter yanked free, his breath coming in sharp bursts. He ran, barreling toward the stairs. The creatures didn't follow immediately. They were letting him go, like a game. But as he reached the bottom step, the front door slammed open. More of them. Figures poured inside, moving with those same stiff, unnatural motions. Copies, the neighbors, other people from the town, all wrong, their faces too still, their eyes too bright, their mouths smiling. They blocked the only exit. A new voice joined them, his own. "Nowhere left to run, officer." The sound came from behind him. Carter turned, and something huge rushed toward him from the dark hallway. The real one, the thing that had been outside, the thing that had been waiting. And now it was done playing. Carter barely had time to react. The thing from the hallway lurched forward, its body folding and unfolding like it was still figuring out how to be. It was tall, horribly tall, its limbs stretched thin and too long, its spine curving unnaturally as it moved. The air around it seemed to bend, as if its very presence was warping the space it occupied. And then Carter saw its face. Not human, not entirely. The skin was human. Patchwork flesh stretched over something that wasn't meant to wear it. Its mouth hung open, wide too wide, teeth sharp and jagged, as if forced into a human shape that never quite fit. Its eyes were gone, Only pits of deep, empty black remained, and yet it smiled. Carter raised his gun, fired 3 shots into its chest. Nothing. It didn't bleed, didn't flinch. It just laughed. A sound that didn't come from its mouth, but from all around him, like the house itself was laughing with it. The things at the door watched, motionless. The Isaac copy moved first, dropping down on all 4s again, its limbs snapping as it twisted toward him. Carter ran. The only way left was backward, toward the kitchen. He grabbed a chair and hurled it at the creature, barely slowing it down. The thing with his own voice called after him, "You can't leave, officer, not yet." His lungs burned. His mind raced. Think, think, think. The door to the back porch. He grabbed for it, ripping it open, and froze. The porch was gone. The entire backyard was different. Not a fence, not trees. Just blackness, a void. The world outside the house had vanished. He turned, heart pounding. The creatures stood at the threshold, watching, waiting. They weren't chasing him anymore. They didn't have to, because the house itself had become the trap. And he had nowhere left to go. Carter's breath came in short, ragged gasps. The night had collapsed, the world outside the house gone, replaced by an endless, swallowing blackness. No sky, no land, just nothing. And behind him the creatures waited. Their smiles stretched wider, their eyes gleaming with something hungry. They didn't move. They didn't need to. He was already caught. Carter's grip on his gun tightened, but deep down, he knew it didn't matter. The thing wearing human skin, the thing that had been watching from the trees, stepped forward. Its limbs folded and twisted as it moved, its joints crackling, and then it spoke. But not in Isaac's voice, not in Lena's, not in the boys'. It spoke in his own voice. "You see it now, don't you?" Carter's pulse thundered. "We don't take lives. We take faces, we take places." The creatures behind him, began to laugh, their voices merging into a single, broken chorus. The copies, the imitations. This wasn't about hunting, it was about replacing. Carter took a slow step back. His boot hit the threshold of the empty blackness behind him. A choice, stay, or step into the unknown. The thing that wore his voice stepped closer, its jagged grin pulling impossibly wide. "Don't worry, officer, we'll take it from here." And then Carter ran. He lunged toward the only thing left, the blackness, and jumped. Falling. The wind howled past him, but there was no ground, no end, just endless darkness, swallowing him whole. And then light. The world snapped back into place. Carter found himself in his cruiser, his hands gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles were white. His breath hitched, his uniform drenched in sweat. The radio crackled. "Dispatch to Officer Carter, status update?" His heart slammed in his chest. The ranch was gone. The road ahead stretched on like it had never been there at all. No house, no barn, no family, just an empty stretch of desert, bathed in the dim glow of dawn. Had it ever been there? His dashcam was still rolling, hands shaking. He reached for the playback. And there it was. The last recorded frame before he fled. The house, the porch, the family standing in the doorway, and standing behind them, wearing his own face and smiling, was him. All right, so I need to get this off my chest. I've never been much of a poster, more of a lurker, but something happened recently that I can't keep to myself. I've always been the type of guy who's curious about things that are better left alone. You know, the kind of person who reads about ghost stories late at night or watches creepy YouTube videos just to get that little adrenaline rush. But what I did a few weeks ago, I'm not sure I'll ever get over it. It started like this. I was in one of those deep dive moods where you're just surfing the internet, looking for something, anything, to distract you from the monotony of life. Work had been hell. My girlfriend was away visiting family, and I just needed something to keep my mind occupied. I'd read about the dark web before, how it's this wild, lawless place where you can find anything if you know where to look. Drugs, weapons, illegal services, you name it. But that's not what I was interested in. I wanted to see if the stories were true, if there really were those hidden corners of the internet where you could find videos that shouldn't exist, or documents that the government supposedly doesn't want you to see. So I did what any idiot would do. I downloaded Tor. I'd read the warnings, of course. People always say not to go poking around unless you know exactly what you're doing. But the thing is, I figured I'd just take a quick look. I mean, what's the harm, right? I'm not some hacker, just a regular guy with a regular job. I wasn't looking to buy anything or get involved in any shady business, just curious. Navigating the dark web is like walking through a maze in pitch-black darkness. There are no guideposts, no handy maps, just a bunch of strange-sounding URLs that don't make any sense unless you're familiar with the territory. I spent about an hour just clicking around, mostly finding dead ends or weird, creepy forums where people talked about things that made me uncomfortable in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was just about to call it quits when I stumbled across this site. No idea how I found it, but the name was something like Lost Pages or Hidden Tomes. It had this old, almost archaic look to it, like something straight out of the early 2000s. There was a single plain text box on the homepage, asking for a phrase. Below it, there was a sentence that read, "Enter your deepest fear." Now, I know this sounds like one of those cheesy horror games, but in the moment, it felt like some kind of challenge. Without thinking, I typed in the first thing that came to mind: isolation. The screen went blank for a moment, and I felt this weird chill, like I'd just stepped into a freezer. Then, a new page loaded, filled with what looked like links to old books, journal entries, and letters, all of them supposedly written by people who had lived long ago. But what caught my eye was a link at the bottom, separate from the rest, titled "Your Story." I hesitated. For a second, I even considered just shutting my laptop and walking away. But like I said, curiosity gets the better of me. I clicked the link, and what I saw sent my heart racing. The page was filled with handwritten notes, not typed, but scanned images of paper like someone had taken a fountain pen and scribbled across a page in a hurry. The writing was neat but frantic, as if the person writing had been desperate to get their thoughts out before they lost the nerve. But what really messed me up was that the handwriting was exactly like mine. The same way I loop my G's and cross my T's, the same little quirks and mistakes I make when I'm in a rush. It was my handwriting, and the words were mine too. I'd never seen these notes before, never written anything like them, but they described thoughts I'd had, memories I didn't even know I'd buried. It was as if someone had reached into my head and pulled out the things I tried to forget, the things I didn't even let myself think about. I couldn't look away. One of the notes mentioned a nightmare I had as a kid, where I was lost in a dark forest, calling for my parents but only hearing my own voice echoing back at me. It was something I hadn't thought about in years, something I hadn't even told my girlfriend. Another note talked about the time I got lost in a shopping mall when I was 6, and how I'd never felt that kind of fear since. I kept scrolling, my hands shaking, and the notes just kept getting more personal, more invasive. Then, at the bottom of the page, there was a single sentence, not handwritten like the rest, but typed out in bold black letters. "You can't escape what's written." I slammed my laptop shut, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. My room felt too small, the walls closing in on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that someone, somewhere, was watching me, laughing at how easily I'd fallen into their trap. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak, every gust of wind outside made me jump. I kept checking my phone, expecting some kind of follow-up, a message, an email, anything that would explain what I'd just seen. But nothing came. The next day at work, I was a mess. I couldn't focus, couldn't think straight. All I could do was replay those notes in my head, trying to figure out how it was possible, how someone could have written those things in my exact handwriting. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came a few days later, when I found the letter in my mailbox. A letter that made everything I'd seen on that site seem like child's play. That's when things really started to go wrong. I'm not exactly sure how to describe the feeling I got when I found that letter in my mailbox. It wasn't fear, not at first. It was more like confusion, mixed with a healthy dose of disbelief. You know that moment when you find something out of place, like your keys on the wrong hook, and you think, that's weird, but then your brain comes up with a dozen logical explanations, and you move on? That's where I was. Except, as I stared at the envelope in my hand, no logical explanation made sense. It was just a plain white envelope, no return address, no stamps, nothing to indicate where it had come from. The only thing on it was my name, handwritten in that same eerily familiar script. My heart sank into my stomach as I realized that it wasn't just familiar, it was identical to the handwriting on that website. My handwriting. For a moment, I just stood there on my porch, staring at the envelope like it might bite me if I got too close. It's funny how your brain can go into overdrive at times like that, thinking through every possible scenario, every potential threat. I even considered the idea that it was some elaborate prank, that one of my friends had somehow found out about my little dark web escapade and decided to mess with me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. None of my friends would go to such lengths, and besides, how could they have known about what I saw? Eventually, I took the envelope inside, my hands trembling as I slid my finger under the seal and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly in thirds. I unfolded it slowly, as if I could delay whatever was coming next by taking my time, and then I saw it, more of that handwritten text, sprawling across the page in tight, deliberate lines. It took me a moment to process what I was looking at because it was the last thing I expected. It was a letter addressed to me, written in the same handwriting as before. But what made my blood run cold was that the words were lifted straight from my own journal. Yeah, that's right, I've kept a journal on and off for years. It's not something I talk about, not even with my girlfriend. It's just a place where I jot down thoughts, feelings, things I need to get off my chest. But this letter, it was like someone had taken one of my entries and copied it out, word for word. The letter started innocuously enough, talking about a rough day at work, some stress I'd been dealing with, and how I'd felt a bit isolated lately. Pretty standard stuff. But as I kept reading, the letter began to mirror my exact thoughts, the ones I hadn't shared with anyone. I could feel my pulse in my ears, each beat loud and insistent, as the letter went on to describe my unease, my growing anxiety, and that gnawing feeling that something was just off in my life. And then, at the bottom, there was a single sentence, written in a different style, as if someone else had taken over. You can't hide from what's already been written. I dropped the letter like it was on fire, my hands shaking uncontrollably. This was no prank. No friend of mine could have accessed my journal. It wasn't online, wasn't synced to any cloud service. It was just a physical notebook I kept locked away in a drawer, the key to which was always on my keychain. I knew with absolute certainty that no one else had seen it. But then, how? I didn't even want to finish the thought. I spent the next hour tearing my apartment apart, searching for hidden cameras, bugs, anything that might explain how someone could have gotten into my most private thoughts. But of course I found nothing. My apartment was just as it had always been, no signs of forced entry, no weird gadgets hidden away. It was almost as if the letter had appeared out of thin air. I started to feel like I was losing it. Maybe I'd written the letter myself during some kind of blackout, some split in my consciousness that I couldn't remember. But that didn't make sense either. I knew my own mind, knew I wasn't the type to dissociate like that. And even if I had, where had the letter come from? How did it get into my mailbox? The paranoia was eating me alive. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of a shadow outside made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, that whoever had sent that letter was out there, just beyond the reach of my senses, waiting for the perfect moment to make their next move. I stopped going out as much, started keeping the blinds closed even during the day. Work became impossible. My mind was too consumed by what had happened, and I was terrified of what might come next. I even thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That someone had sent me a letter in my own handwriting? That I'd seen things online that shouldn't exist? They'd think I was crazy, and maybe I was starting to agree with them. But I couldn't just sit there and wait for something else to happen. I needed answers, and I figured the only way to get them was to go back to where this all started. So, against every instinct screaming at me to stop, I powered up my laptop and opened Tor again. I knew it was a mistake the moment I did it, but it was too late to turn back. I retraced my steps, clicking through the same shady links until I found that site again, Lost Pages or whatever it was called. The homepage looked the same, with that simple text box asking for my deepest fear. My hands hovered over the keyboard, hesitating before I typed out the same word: isolation. The page loaded, but this time the content was different. There were no journal entries, no letters, just a single large block of text in the middle of the screen. Some stories are written before they happen. Others are written as they unfold. Yours is still being penned. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling a mix of dread and resignation. I didn't know what to do next, didn't know how to stop whatever was happening to me. But as much as I wanted to shut down my laptop and walk away, I knew I couldn't. Not yet. There were still too many unanswered questions, too many things that didn't make sense. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I clicked on the text. The screen flashed, and before I knew it, I was looking at a list of coordinates, dates, and times. At first, they didn't mean anything to me, just a series of random numbers. But then I realized that the first set of coordinates was for my hometown, and the date next to it was from years ago. The date of the day I got lost in that shopping mall. My blood ran cold as I scrolled down the list. There were more dates, more locations, each one corresponding to some event in my life that had filled me with fear or anxiety. But then I reached the last entry and my breath caught in my throat. The final date was today, and the coordinates, they led directly to my apartment. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling like the world had just tilted on its axis. My apartment, the place I had always considered my safe haven, was now the focal point of this bizarre, terrifying game. And the date. It was today. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Whatever was happening, whatever had been orchestrating this nightmare, had planned for it to culminate right here, right now. My first instinct was to run, grab my keys, get in my car, and just drive until I was miles away from this place. But something held me back, a nagging voice in my head whispering that it wouldn't matter where I went. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't bound by physical spaces. If it could reach into my mind, into my private thoughts, then it could find me anywhere. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I braced myself for whatever was coming. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to go about my routine as normally as possible, ate breakfast, watched TV, even attempted to read a book. But my mind was elsewhere, constantly drifting back to that final entry on the website. My every move felt rehearsed, like I was following a script someone else had written for me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that every step I took was part of some larger plan I couldn't comprehend. By the time night fell, my nerves were shot. I couldn't focus on anything for more than a few minutes without feeling that creeping sense of dread, like something was just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every little sound, my fridge humming, the wind brushing against the windows, set my heart racing. Around midnight, the anxiety became too much to bear. I decided to take a walk around my apartment, as if somehow that would clear my head or at least burn off some of the nervous energy. My place isn't big, just a one-bedroom unit on the third floor of an old building. But that night it felt like a labyrinth, each corner hiding potential dangers, each shadow deeper and darker than before. As I walked past my bedroom door, I felt a strange pull, like something was drawing me inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the street lamp outside filtering through the blinds. Everything looked normal at first glance. My bed neatly made, clothes piled on the chair, the faint outline of the dresser against the far wall. But something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the air in the room was different, heavier somehow, like it was pressing down on me. And then I noticed the smell. It was faint, barely noticeable at first, but unmistakable. A scent like old paper, mixed with a hint of ink. The kind of smell you'd find in an ancient library or an old bookstore, where the pages of the books have yellowed with age. It shouldn't have been there. I hadn't been reading in bed, hadn't brought any books into the room for weeks. I moved toward the dresser, my feet dragging as if the air itself was trying to hold me back. When I reached it, I hesitated for a second, my hand hovering over the top drawer. I knew I needed to open it, but a part of me was terrified of what I might find inside. My mind was racing, coming up with all kinds of scenarios. Maybe the letter would be there, or another note, something to further this twisted game. But what I found was even worse. Inside the drawer, lying on top of a pile of neatly folded clothes, was my journal. The same journal I kept locked away in my desk on the other side of the apartment. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead as I stared down at it. How had it gotten there? I hadn't touched it in weeks, hadn't even thought about it until all of this started. With trembling hands, I picked up the journal and flipped it open. The pages were just as I remembered them, my writing, my thoughts, everything in its place. But as I turned to the last entry, my heart skipped a beat. There was a new entry, one I hadn't written. The handwriting was mine, the loops and curves of the letters unmistakable. But the words, they were foreign, alien, like someone had crawled inside my head and jotted down their own twisted version of my thoughts. It described in detail everything that had happened over the past few days, the dark web, the letter, the growing sense of dread, everything. But then it went on to describe things that hadn't happened yet, things that were supposed to happen tonight. The entry ended with a chilling line. The story ends when the truth is revealed. I slammed the journal shut and stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet in my haste to get away from it. My breath was coming in short, panicked gasps, my heart racing so fast I thought it might burst. This wasn't just some sick joke. Whoever, or whatever, was behind this was messing with my reality, rewriting my life like I was nothing more than a character in their story. I bolted out of the bedroom, not even bothering to close the drawer or turn off the light. I needed to get out of there, to clear my head, to breathe. I grabbed my jacket and keys, nearly yanking the door off its hinges in my rush to get outside. The hallway was dark and silent, the kind of silence that's almost oppressive, as if the walls themselves were absorbing every sound. I practically flew down the stairs, taking them two at a time, and burst out into the cool night air. The city was quiet, the streets deserted, the only movement coming from the occasional flicker of a street lamp or the distant sound of a car passing by. But even out there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, that somewhere in the darkness, eyes were following my every move. I didn't know where to go, didn't have a plan, just started walking. My feet carried me down familiar streets, past closed shops and silent buildings, until I found myself in front of a 24-hour diner. It was a place I'd been to a few times, usually late at night when I couldn't sleep and needed a change of scenery. The neon sign buzzed softly, casting a pale blue glow over the empty parking lot. I went inside, the door chiming softly as I entered. The place was nearly empty. Just a lone waitress behind the counter and an old man sitting in one of the booths, nursing a cup of coffee. I slid into a booth at the back, my back to the wall so I could see the entire room. It felt safer that way, being able to keep an eye on everything. The waitress came over, a tired smile on her face as she handed me a menu. I ordered a coffee, black, and waited until she was out of earshot before pulling out my phone. I needed to document what was happening, to write it all down before I lost my nerve or started questioning my sanity even more. Maybe, I thought, if I wrote it out, I could make sense of it, find some kind of pattern or clue that would help me understand what was happening. But as I opened my notes app, something stopped me cold. There, at the top of the screen, was a new note, one I hadn't written. The title was simple, just today's date. With a sense of dread settling over me like a heavy blanket, I clicked on it. The note was short, just a few lines, but they were enough to send a chill down my spine. "You can run, but the story follows. There's no escape. Go home." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. This was impossible. My phone had been with me the whole time. No one could have accessed it, and yet, there it was, another message, another piece of the puzzle that made no sense. I should have stayed in that diner, should have called someone, anyone, but instead I did the only thing I could think of. I paid for my coffee, left a tip on the counter, and walked back out into the night. My feet carried me back to my apartment, every step feeling like it was being guided by some invisible hand. When I reached my building, I hesitated at the entrance, my hand on the door handle. The windows of my apartment were dark, the place looking as normal as ever, but I knew deep down that once I stepped inside, things would never be the same. I took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and walked inside, the quiet of the building wrapping around me like a shroud. The hallway was empty, just as I'd left it, but there was a new sense of foreboding in the air, a heaviness that seemed to press down on me from all sides. I reached my apartment door, my hand shaking as I unlocked it and stepped inside. The living room was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, casting long shadows across the floor. Everything looked untouched, just as I'd left it. But there, on the coffee table, was something new. Another envelope, identical to the first one, waiting for me. And that's when I knew. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I stood there in the doorway, the darkness of my apartment feeling more oppressive than ever. My eyes locked onto the envelope on the coffee table, its stark white standing out like a beacon in the gloom. I didn't want to touch it, didn't want to know what was inside, but I also knew I couldn't just leave it there. Whatever this was, whatever game I was caught up in, it wasn't going to stop until I played along. With a deep breath, I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, the click of the lock echoing through the silence. The envelope seemed to call to me, its presence in the room an almost physical weight on my shoulders. I took slow, deliberate steps toward it, my heart pounding louder with each one. When I finally reached the coffee table, I hesitated for just a moment before picking up the envelope. It felt heavier than it should have, as if the paper itself was saturated with the gravity of what I was about to uncover. My fingers trembled as I tore it open, revealing another sheet of paper inside, folded just like the last one. I unfolded the paper and felt my breath catch in my throat. The handwriting was, once again, a perfect match for my own. But this letter was different. It wasn't a copy of anything I'd written before, and it wasn't some cryptic message designed to mess with my head. It was a story about a man who had stumbled upon something he shouldn't have, who had become the unwitting subject of a twisted experiment. As I read the letter, a chill ran down my spine. The story described a man who had, out of boredom and curiosity, ventured onto the dark web, just as I had. He found a mysterious website, lost pages, and entered his deepest fear into a text box. The website responded by showing him things that were impossibly personal, things that no one else should have known. But the story didn't stop there. It went on to describe how this man's life began to unravel, how he started receiving letters in his own handwriting, each one revealing more about his past, his present, and his future. The man grew increasingly paranoid, convinced that he was being watched, that his every move was being controlled by some unseen force. He tried to escape, but no matter where he went, The letters kept finding him, guiding him back to his apartment, back to where it all began. The final lines of the story sent a shiver through me. The man returned home, the weight of inevitability pressing down on him. He knew there was no escape, that the story was already written, and he was merely living it out. As he opened the door to his apartment, he found one last letter waiting for him. This letter was different, though. This one didn't just tell his story. It told the truth behind it. I stared at those words, my mind racing. This wasn't just a story. It was my story, a perfect recounting of everything that had happened to me since I'd clicked on that damned website. But how? How could someone know all of this? It was as if they were writing my life as it unfolded, each word dictating my next move, each sentence sealing my fate. And then I reached the last line of the letter, a single sentence that made my blood run cold. The truth is waiting for you in the place where the story began. The place where the story began. My mind flashed back to the first letter, to the website, to that night when I'd accessed the dark web out of nothing more than curiosity. But no, it went back further than that, didn't it? The story didn't really start with the website. It started with my fear, my deepest fear, isolation. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The website, the letters, the journal entries, they were all connected, all part of some elaborate plan to isolate me, to make me feel completely alone, like there was no one in the world I could trust. And it was working. I distanced myself from everyone, shut myself off from the outside world, convinced that no one could help me. But why? What was the point of all this? I needed answers, and I knew where I had to go to find them. The letter had said the truth was waiting in the place where the story began. For me, that place wasn't just the website. It was my mind. My deepest fear, the one I'd typed into that text box, was what had set all of this in motion. I knew what I had to do. I walked over to my desk, where my journal usually sat locked away. I'd been avoiding it, scared of what I might find, but now I understood that it held the key to all of this. I unlocked the drawer and pulled out the journal, my hand steady for the first time in what felt like days. Flipping through the pages, I skimmed over the entries, looking for anything that stood out, and then I found it. The first entry I'd ever written, years ago, back when I'd first started keeping the journal. It was about the time I'd gotten lost in that shopping mall as a kid, about the fear and isolation I'd felt wandering through the endless corridors, calling for my parents but getting no response. I hadn't thought about that day in years, but now it all came rushing back. The fear of being alone, of being lost with no one to help me, had stuck with me all this time. And somehow, whoever or whatever was behind all of this had latched onto that fear, using it to control me, to trap me in this never-ending nightmare. But why? What did they want from me? As if in response to my unspoken question, I felt a strange urge to turn to the very last page of the journal. I didn't remember writing anything there, but as I flipped to it, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. There, in the same familiar handwriting, was a message I hadn't written. You are the author of your own story, but the ending has already been decided. Return to the beginning, and the truth will be revealed. I stared at the words, my mind reeling. The beginning? The shopping mall? The website? The dark web? Or was it something else? Something deeper? More personal? The letter had said the truth was in the place where the story began, but now it was telling me to return to the beginning. I knew what I had to do, even though every fiber of my being screamed at me to stop. I needed to go back to the website, back to where all of this had started. I needed to face whatever was waiting for me there, to confront the truth head-on, no matter how terrifying it might be. With a deep breath, I closed the journal and set it aside. My laptop was still on the desk, the screen dark. I reached out and touched the keyboard, bringing it to life. The familiar icons appeared on the desktop, and for a moment I hesitated, but there was no turning back now. I opened Tor and navigated to the website once more. The same text box greeted me, the same prompt asking for my deepest fear. But this time I didn't type anything. Instead, I clicked on the blank space, my heart racing as the screen flickered and a new page loaded. Time seemed to stretch and warp around me as I stared at the figure standing in the doorway. The room felt like it was closing in, the shadows creeping closer, thickening the air. The man's face was still hidden, just a dark outline against the dim light. But I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting for me to make the next move. In his hand was the final letter, the one that would bring this nightmare to its inevitable conclusion. I didn't know what was in it, but I knew it held the answers I'd been searching for, the truth behind everything that had happened, the reason for all the fear and isolation that had been creeping into my life. But more than that, I knew it contained the ending to my story, the final words that would determine my fate. For a long moment, neither of us moved. It was as if the room had been frozen in time, caught in the tension between us. Then, slowly, deliberately, the figure took a step forward, crossing the threshold into the living room. My breath caught in my throat as he extended his hand, offering the letter to me, his movements smooth and unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get out of there, to do anything but take that letter. But I knew, deep down, that there was no escaping this. Whatever was happening, whatever had been set in motion, it wasn't going to stop until I saw it through to the end. With a trembling hand, I reached out and took the letter from him. The paper was cool and smooth under my fingers, the envelope sealed with a wax stamp that bore no insignia, just a simple blank seal. The figure didn't move as I carefully broke the seal and pulled out the sheet of paper inside. The letter was written in the same familiar handwriting, the words flowing across the page in neat, precise lines. But this time, there was no story, no cryptic message or riddle to unravel. Instead, there were just a few short sentences, simple, direct, and chilling in their finality. You have been chosen to write the story. The pen is yours, but the ending is ours. Everything you have seen, everything you have experienced, has led to this moment. The truth is what you make it. I blinked, the words sinking in slowly, their meaning unraveling in my mind. Chosen? To write the story? What did that even mean? Was this some kind of test? Some twisted experiment to see how far I would go, how much I could endure before breaking? Or was it something deeper, something more profound? Before I could even begin to process it, the room around me seemed to shift. The shadows deepened, the walls closing in, and the figure in front of me began to fade, dissolving into the darkness like a wisp of smoke. But just before he disappeared completely, I caught a glimpse of his face. My face. It was like looking into a mirror, but not quite. There were subtle differences, little details that set him apart. He looked older, more worn, as if he had lived through countless lifetimes, each one leaving its mark on him. And his eyes were empty, devoid of emotion, of life, as if they had seen too much, known too much, and were now nothing but hollow windows to a soul long lost. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the room, the letter still clutched in my hand. The silence was deafening, the air thick with the weight of what I had just witnessed. My mind was a whirl of confusion, fear, and a strange sense of resignation. The words of the letter echoed in my head. The truth is what you make it. It took me a while to move, to process what had just happened. The shadows in the room seemed less threatening now, more like old friends than the enemies they had been just moments before. I looked down at the letter again, reading and rereading those final words, trying to make sense of them. And then it hit me. The truth was what I made it. This whole time I had been a pawn in someone else's story, following a script that had been written long before I even knew I was a part of it. But now the pen was in my hand. Now I had the power to decide how this ended. I walked back to my desk, the laptop still open, the screen still showing that same haunting message. You are not alone. The truth is already written. But now I saw it differently, saw it for what it really was. A challenge, a test of my will, of my ability to shape my own destiny. I took a deep breath, the fear that had gripped me for so long finally starting to loosen its hold. I knew what I had to do. I reached for my journal, flipping it open to the last page where that mysterious message had appeared. I grabbed a pen, my hand steady as I crossed out the words that had been written there, replacing them with something new, something of my own making. The story ends when I say it does. As soon as I finished writing, a strange calm settled over me, the tension in the room dissolving like mist in the morning sun. The shadows in the corners receded, the air lightened, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. The sense of being watched, of being manipulated, faded away, leaving only the quiet hum of the city outside my window. I closed the journal and set it aside, my heart finally at ease. Whatever had been controlling me, whatever force had been writing my story, was gone now. The pen was in my hand, and the ending was mine to decide. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The streetlights cast a warm, comforting glow over the sidewalks, and I could see people walking, cars passing by, life going on as usual. It was a beautiful night, the kind that made you feel like everything was right with the world, and maybe, just maybe it was. I had faced my fear, confronted the darkness that had been closing in on me, and in the end, I had taken control. The story was mine now, and I knew exactly how I wanted it to end. With a final glance at the quiet street below, I turned away from the window, a small smile on my lips. I knew that this wasn't over, not completely. There would be more challenges, more moments of fear and doubt, but now I was ready for them. Now I knew that I had the power to write my own story, to shape my own truth, and that was a truth that no one, no matter how powerful, could take away from me. He didn't move, didn't say anything, just stood there watching me. And then, without a word, he reached into his coat and pulled out something small, something that gleamed in the dim light of the room. It was another letter, the last letter. I didn't need to open it to know what it said. The story was over. The ending had already been written. Hey everyone. This is something I've been sitting on for a while, and I'm not sure how to even begin, but I feel like I need to share this story. Not because I want to scare anyone, but because I don't want someone else to make the same mistake I did. So, a little backstory first. I've always been into tech, nothing too hardcore. Just your average guy who enjoys tinkering with computers and diving into whatever new software or app catches my eye. I've got this small circle of online friends who are pretty much the same. We chat on Discord, share memes, talk about gaming, and occasionally, we dip our toes into the weirder parts of the internet. One of these friends, let's call him Alex, is a bit of an enigma. He's the kind of guy who knows a little too much about the underbelly of the web. He's always talking about the newest exploits, the latest conspiracy theories, and sometimes he'd hint at having access to parts of the internet that most people wouldn't dare touch. We all kind of brushed it off as him being a bit of a tryhard, trying to seem edgier than he really was. But a few months ago, he sent me a message out of the blue. Yo, have you ever used Tor? Now I knew about Tor, the anonymity network that supposedly lets you browse the internet without being tracked, but I'd never actually used it. The idea of poking around the dark web was more of a, haha, that's interesting kind of thing rather than something I'd actually consider doing. But Alex was persistent. He told me about some crazy stuff he'd found. Forums where people discuss the strangest things, hidden marketplaces, and, most intriguing to me, this link he'd found that was supposedly some kind of interactive experience. He wouldn't go into too much detail, just saying that it was creepy as hell, and that I needed to see it for myself. At first I was hesitant, but the more he talked about it, the more curious I got. Maybe it was the way he framed it, like it was some kind of digital urban legend. You know how it is. When someone dangles something mysterious in front of you, it's hard not to bite. After a few days of back and forth, I caved. I figured it'd be a good story to tell later, if nothing else. I downloaded Tor and set it up, following a guide I found online. It wasn't too complicated, just a few steps to make sure I was browsing anonymously. When I told Alex I was ready, he sent me the link with a winking emoji. That should have been the first red flag. I should have known better than to trust a random link from a guy who got his kicks from scaring people, but I guess my curiosity got the better of me. The link led to a page with a plain black background and a single line of text in the center. Enter your name. Simple enough, right? I thought it was just some stupid prank. I typed in my name, but as soon as I hit enter, the screen flickered and a loading bar appeared. It wasn't your standard loading bar either. This one looked like something straight out of the 90s, pixelated and slow as hell. Then the page went blank except for a small box that appeared in the middle of the screen. It looked like a chat window, but it wasn't connected to any chat service I recognized. A single message appeared. Welcome, Marco. That was when the unease started to set in. I hadn't expected it to actually use my name, my real name. Another message popped up in the box. We've been waiting for you. Okay, now I was freaked out. But it was also kind of fascinating, like I was being drawn into something deeper than just a creepy website. I thought maybe Alex was messing with me, that he had somehow rigged this site to respond like this, but that didn't make sense. How would he know when I'd log on? How would he know my name? I was about to close the window when the chat box flickered again and a new message appeared. Don't leave yet, the fun is just beginning. I'll admit I was hooked. It was like being in a horror movie where you know the protagonist is making all the wrong choices, but you can't help but keep watching. The screen changed again, this time displaying a list of options, things like explore, interact, observe. I clicked on explore, half expecting the whole thing to crash or for some cheap jump scare to pop up. But instead the page transitioned smoothly into what looked like a directory of some kind, like a digital map with nodes representing different areas to visit. Each node had a name, things like the library, the garden, the labyrinth. Some of the names were mundane, but others were bizarre, like the Room of Echoes or the Endless Hallway. I clicked on the library, figuring it was the safest sounding one. The page loaded into a dark background with an eerie low humming sound that I could only just hear if I turned up my volume. The library was represented by a series of book titles, but these weren't normal books. The titles were all messed up, like the Book of Shadows and the History of Forgotten Things. But one of them caught my eye, the Watcher's Journal. I clicked on it, and the page started loading again, but slower this time. While I waited, I noticed something odd, a small icon in the corner of my screen that hadn't been there before. It was a camera icon. That's when I noticed my webcam light was on. Panic surged through me. I immediately slammed the laptop shut, but I knew it was too late. In those few seconds, someone, or something, had accessed my camera. I yanked the power cord out and shut everything down. My heart was pounding as I sat there, staring at the blank screen, feeling like an idiot. After a few minutes, I slowly reopened the laptop and started it up again. The first thing I did was disable the webcam, but the damage was done. I was sure of it. But what scared me more was what I saw when I opened my browser. There, staring back at me, was an image, a low-res, grainy picture of me, taken just moments ago. My blood ran cold. I stared at the picture, feeling like I was being watched, not just through the screen, but in the room with me. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the picture vanished, replaced by a single line of text. We see you. My name. I slammed the laptop shut again and sat there in silence. The the darkness of my room pressing in around me. That's when I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping sound coming from somewhere outside my window. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my room, every muscle tense, my ears straining for any sound that might break the eerie silence. The tapping had stopped after a few minutes, but the dread it left behind didn't fade. I kept telling myself it was just a branch or a bird, something mundane, but the timing. It was too perfect, too in sync with everything that had just happened. I ended up dragging my desk chair across the room and wedging it under the door handle, like that would somehow keep whatever was out there from getting in. My eyes kept darting back to the window, half expecting to see a face staring in at me, but the curtains were drawn and I didn't dare touch them. As the hours crawled by, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was all a prank. Maybe Alex was pulling some elaborate stunt to mess with me. But that didn't explain the webcam. It didn't explain how they, or whoever it was, knew my name, or how they managed to get a picture of me within seconds. By the time the sun started to creep through the cracks in the curtains, I was exhausted. But I was also determined to get to the bottom of this. I needed answers, and the only person who might have them was Alex. I shot him a message on Discord, trying to keep it casual, asking if he was up. He responded almost immediately, like he'd been waiting. "Yo, did you check out the link?" he asked. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard before typing. "Yeah, it was weird. Did you set it up?" There was a pause, and I imagined him on the other side of the screen, smirking at how freaked out I probably sounded. But when his reply came, it wasn't what I expected. "Set it up, dude. I just found it. Why? What happened?" Something about his response felt off, like he genuinely had no idea what I was talking about. I debated whether or not to tell him about the picture, about the tapping, but I didn't want to sound paranoid. "Just got some creepy vibes, that's all," I finally replied. "Lol, that's the point," he shot back. "You should have seen what I found when I clicked around. Totally messed up." I didn't ask him to elaborate. I didn't want to know. Instead, I told him I was done with it, that I was going to uninstall Tor and forget the whole thing. He just sent back a shrug emoji, like he couldn't care less. After that, I went through my computer and deleted everything related to Tor. I cleared my browsing history, uninstalled the software, and even ran a virus scan just to be safe. I felt a little better after that, like I was closing a door on something that should never have been opened. But the relief was short-lived. That evening, I got an email. The subject line was just my name, and the sender was a string of random characters, no recognizable address. My stomach twisted as I clicked it open. The email was empty except for a single attachment, a video file. Against every ounce of common sense, I clicked on it. The video was shaky, like it had been recorded on a phone or a hidden camera. It was dark too, the image barely visible. But I recognized the layout immediately. It was my bedroom. The camera was facing my bed, and I could see myself lying there, asleep, the dim light from my computer screen casting a faint glow across the room. The footage was recent, no more than a few hours old, judging by the position of the light coming through the window. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I hadn't been asleep at all that night, which meant someone had been in my room, recording me, without me even noticing. As the video continued to play, the camera moved slowly toward the bed, like whoever was holding it was creeping closer. Then, just as it reached the edge of the mattress, the video cut out, leaving the screen blank. I sat there staring at the black screen, my heart pounding in my chest. My first instinct was to call the police, but what was I supposed to say? That someone had been in my room recording me and then sent me the video as a taunt. And what proof did I have? A grainy, low-res video that could have been faked. Instead, I did the only thing that seemed to make sense at the time. I called Alex. He picked up on the third ring, his voice groggy like I'd just woken him up. "Dude, what's up?" "There's someone in my house," I blurted out before I could stop myself. What? What are you talking about? I could hear the confusion in his voice, but I didn't care. I explained everything. The video, the email, the fact that someone had been in my room while I was sitting just a few feet away. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said something that made my blood run cold. Did you click on the link again? No, I deleted everything. Are you sure? Because this sounds like the kind of crap that happens when you mess around with that stuff. Maybe they got your IP or something. I hadn't thought of that. If they'd gotten my IP, they could potentially track me, maybe even hack into my computer. But that didn't explain how they got into my room. That didn't explain the video. Look, just chill out, Alex said, his voice calm but firm. Unplug your computer, turn off your Wi-Fi, and stay somewhere else tonight. I'll do some digging and see if I can figure out what's going on. I wanted to believe him, to think that he had some way of fixing this, but the fear gnawing at my gut wouldn't let go. I grabbed my laptop, stuffed it into my bag, and headed out. I didn't even bother packing anything else. I just needed to get out of there. I ended up crashing at a friend's place, someone who wasn't involved in any of this, someone who had no idea what I'd gotten myself into. I didn't tell them the whole story, just that I had some computer issues and needed a place to stay for the night. They didn't ask questions, which was a relief. I wasn't ready to explain any of this to anyone else. That night, I barely slept again. Every creak, every distant noise made me jump. I kept thinking about that video, about the way the camera moved closer, about the fact that someone had been in my room without me knowing. By morning, I felt like a wreck, but I was also determined. I decided that when I got back to my place, I'd reset my router, change all my passwords, and maybe even get a new laptop. I just wanted to put all this behind me. But when I returned home, the first thing I noticed was the smell, something foul like rotten eggs or sulfur hanging in the air. My heart started pounding as I stepped inside. The place was a mess, drawers pulled open, papers scattered everywhere. It looked like someone had been searching for something. I rushed to my room hoping that it was just a burglary, that they hadn't found what they were looking for and had left. But when I opened the door, my blood turned to ice. There on my bed was a small, handwritten note. The paper was old and yellowed, like it had been taken from some ancient book. The message was scrawled in dark, almost oily ink. We're watching. If I'd thought I was scared before, it was nothing compared to the sheer terror that gripped me as I stared at that note. My hands were shaking, and I had to fight the urge to just bolt out of the house and never come back. But something kept me rooted to the spot. A sick curiosity, maybe, or the desperate need to understand what was happening. After a few minutes, I forced myself to move. I carefully picked up the note, half expecting something to jump out at me, or for the ink to smear and reveal something even more sinister beneath. But it was just a note, just 3 words that felt like they were branded into my mind. I tore the house apart, looking for anything out of place, anything that might give me a clue as to who had been there or how they'd gotten in. But nothing seemed missing, and aside from the mess, there was no sign that anyone had actually been there. No footprints, no fingerprints, nothing. It was like they'd slipped in and out of existence, leaving only that note as proof. The smell, though, that lingering sulfuric stench, clung to the air like a bad omen. I opened all the windows, hoping to air the place out, but it didn't help. It was like the smell was embedded in the walls, in the very foundation of the house. After hours of searching and finding nothing, I sat down on the edge of my bed, feeling defeated. My thoughts kept circling back to that video, to the fact that someone had been in my room while I was there. It made my skin crawl, the idea that they could have been inches away from me, that they could have done anything and I wouldn't have known. I knew I couldn't stay there. Whatever was going on, it was beyond anything I could handle on my own. I needed help, but the problem was, I didn't know who to turn to. The police? What would I say? That someone was leaving creepy notes and taking videos of me? I could already imagine the look on their faces, the way they'd probably tell me it was just some sick prank, and to not worry about it. But it didn't feel like a prank. It felt personal, like whoever was behind this was targeting me specifically. And then there was the nagging suspicion that this was all connected to that damn link, that by opening it, I'd somehow invited this horror into my life. I decided to call Alex again. He had to know something, anything that could explain what was happening. I was about to dial when I noticed a new message from him on Discord. Found something. It read, "You're not gonna like it." I felt a chill run down my spine. What could he have found that was worse than what I'd already experienced? My fingers trembled as I typed out a reply. "What is it?" His response came almost instantly. "That site we were on, it's connected to something bigger, some kind of cult or secret society. They're called the Watchers. From what I can tell, they're not just on the dark web. They've got a network that reaches into the real world, and they don't like people snooping around." I stared at the screen, the words blurring as my mind struggled to process what he was saying. A cult? A secret society? It sounded like something out of a conspiracy theory, but the events of the past few days made it impossible to dismiss. "What do they want?" I typed back, my throat dry. "I don't know," Alex replied. "But from what I've read, once they mark you, they don't stop. They watch, they follow, and eventually—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The implications were clear enough. My heart was racing, a cold sweat forming on my forehead. I felt trapped, like a fly caught in a web, with no idea how to escape. If Alex was right, then these people, or whatever they were, had marked me. And now they were watching, waiting. I had to get out of there. The house no longer felt like a safe place, more like a trap that was slowly closing in around me. I grabbed my bag, stuffing it with the essentials, clothes, my laptop, the note, anything I could think of. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. As I was about to leave, my phone buzzed. Another email. My heart sank as I saw the subject line, "Don't run." I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me not to open it. But I had to know. I tapped on the message, bracing myself for whatever horror it might contain. The email was short, just a few lines of text. "Running won't help. We see you wherever you go. You belong to us now. Come to the library, and we can talk." My blood ran cold. The library. That was the first place I'd clicked on that damn site. The first place that had started this whole nightmare. And now they wanted me to go back. It felt like a trap, like they were baiting me, trying to lure me into something even worse. But what choice did I have? If they really could see me wherever I went, then running was pointless. Maybe, just maybe, I could find some answers if I went back. Maybe I could figure out how to get out of this. I typed a quick reply to Alex, telling him what had happened and that I was going to the library. His response was immediate, a flurry of messages begging me not to go, telling me it was too dangerous, that I should just disappear and lay low. But I couldn't do that, not without knowing what these people wanted or how to make it stop. I thanked him for his help, told him I'd be in touch, and then I shut off my phone. I didn't want any more distractions, didn't want to second-guess myself. It was time to face this head-on. I plugged my laptop back in, reinstalled Tor, and navigated to the site again. My hands were shaking as I typed in the link, but I forced myself to keep going. The same black screen appeared, the same loading bar, and then the familiar unsettling chat box. "Welcome back," the message appeared, as if they'd been waiting for me. I clicked on Explore again, and this time I didn't hesitate. I selected the library, bracing myself for what might come next. The page loaded slowly, just like before, the humming sound filling my room. But this time, something was different. The titles of the books were gone, replaced by a single glaring red word: Entrance. I clicked on it, and the screen flickered, transitioning into what looked like a video feed. My heart pounded as I realized what I was looking at: my own front door. The video was live, the camera angle showing the street outside my driveway and the door I had just locked behind me. And then I saw it. Movement. A figure stepping into view. It was a man dressed in a black coat, his face obscured by the shadow of a hood. He moved slowly, deliberately toward the door, and I realized with a jolt of fear that he was holding something. A book. He reached the door, paused for a moment, and then knelt down, placing the book on the doorstep. As he stood back up, he turned to face the camera directly, his face still hidden in shadow. But I could feel his eyes on me, like he was looking right through the screen, right at me. I stood there, holding the book with trembling hands, the words, "You are one of us now," burning into my mind. The morning sun seemed too bright, too normal, casting the situation in an unsettling contrast. Here I was, standing on my own front porch, holding a mysterious book delivered by a hooded stranger, and all I could think was, what have I gotten myself into? I should have thrown the book away, or better yet, burned it right then and there. But curiosity, twisted and dark, kept me from doing it. I took it inside, shut the door behind me, and sat down at the kitchen table, the book staring back at me like an accusation. Taking a deep breath, I flipped to the next page. The ink was the same oily black, the letters jagged and uneven as if they'd been scratched into the paper with something sharp. The text was difficult to read, like the words were shifting on the page, but I managed to make out the first line. "The Watchers have chosen you." A chill ran down my spine. I didn't want to be chosen by anyone, let alone some shadowy group that left cryptic messages and recorded videos of me without my knowledge. But I couldn't stop reading. The book seemed to pull me in, each word laced with a creeping sense of dread. The next few pages were filled with what looked like rules or guidelines. They were vague, but the gist of it was clear. I was being inducted into something, and there were expectations. Do not speak of the Watchers to outsiders. Obey the commands given to you. We see all, know all. There is no escape. The final rule was the most disturbing. Acceptance is the only path to survival. I slammed the book shut, my heart racing. This wasn't just a book. It was a manual, a guide to something I wanted no part of. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how trapped I was. I couldn't just ignore this. They had my information, my location, pictures of me in my own home. They knew where I was, and apparently, they could get to me whenever they wanted. I needed to get out of there, to find someplace safe, but where could I go? If they were truly watching, if they had the kind of reach that Alex hinted at, there wasn't anywhere I could hide. Running wouldn't help, and going to the police seemed pointless. They'd think I was crazy, or worse, that I was making it up. I spent the rest of the day in a state of numbness, pacing around the house, jumping at every little noise. The book sat on the table like a ticking bomb, and I couldn't bring myself to touch it again. I knew I should call Alex, but what could he do? He'd warned me not to go back to the library, and now I was deeper in than ever. As night fell, the house grew cold and quiet. I locked all the doors, double-checked the windows, and sat down in the living room, the TV on, but muted. I couldn't focus on anything, my mind racing with thoughts of what the Watchers wanted from me, and what would happen if I didn't comply. Then, around midnight, my phone buzzed with a notification. I jumped, nearly dropping it as I fumbled to unlock the screen. It was another email, the sender the same string of random characters as before. The subject line read, "Instructions." I didn't want to open it. Every instinct screamed at me to delete it, to pretend it didn't exist, but I couldn't. With a shaking hand, I tapped on the message. "You have been chosen to complete the initiation. Failure to comply will result in consequences. Tomorrow at midnight you will return to the library, bring the book. Further instructions will be provided." My stomach dropped. Initiation? What kind of initiation? And what did they mean by consequences? I didn't need to guess. The Watchers had already shown they could invade my home, watch me while I slept, and send people to my door without me even knowing. I had no doubt they could do far worse if they wanted to. But what choice did I have? If I refused, if I tried to run, they'd come after me. And if I went along with it, well, I didn't know what would happen, but at least it might buy me some time. I spent the next day in a daze, going through the motions of normal life but feeling like I was living someone else's reality. I couldn't focus on anything, couldn't think of anything but the clock ticking down to midnight. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hooded figure, the book, the note. I was trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. As the evening drew closer, I packed a small bag, just in case. I wasn't sure what I was planning to do, but it felt better to be prepared for anything. The book sat at the top of the bag, its weight a constant reminder of what was coming. By 11:30 I was sitting in my car, engine idling, staring at the road ahead. I hadn't told anyone where I was going, hadn't reached out to Alex or anyone else. I didn't want to drag them into this mess, and besides, who would believe me? I pulled out of the driveway, the night swallowing me up as I drove toward the spot where I'd first accessed the library. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were tracking my every move. I reached the location at 11:55, the same parking lot where I'd first opened that cursed link. The place was deserted, the only light coming from a flickering street lamp at the far end. I parked the car and sat there, my heart pounding in my chest, the minutes ticking by agonizingly slowly. At exactly midnight, my phone buzzed again. Another email, this one with no subject line. I opened it, my breath catching in my throat. Walk to the center of the lot. Place the book on the ground. Await further instructions. I didn't want to do it. Every fiber of my being screamed to get back in the car and drive as far away as I could. But where would I go? They would find me. They always found me. With a sense of dread weighing me down, I grabbed the book and stepped out of the car. The night air was cold, biting into my skin as I walked to the center of the lot. The street lamp buzzed overhead, casting long, eerie shadows across the asphalt. I placed the book on the ground and stood back, my breath visible in the cold air. Nothing happened. For a few long, excruciating moments, I just stood there, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. After the encounter in the parking lot, I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with 1,000 questions and not a single answer. The Watchers had revealed themselves, but I still had no idea what they wanted from me, or what they would do next. When I got back to my house, the sense of violation and dread was overwhelming. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow that flickered in the corners of my vision made my skin crawl. I wanted to get rid of the book, to throw it into a fire or bury it somewhere far away, but something told me that it wouldn't make a difference. Whatever was happening to me, it was beyond my control now. I spent the next day holed up in my room, curtains drawn tight, my laptop on my bed as I desperately searched for anything that could help me understand what was going on. I scoured forums, reached out to anonymous groups online, even tried digging deeper into the dark web, but everything led to dead ends. No one had heard of the Watchers, at least no one who was willing to talk about them. Alex had gone silent. I sent him message after message, hoping he might have found something new, but he didn't respond. It was like he'd vanished, leaving me to face this nightmare alone. As the day wore on, the tension in my chest grew unbearable. I kept glancing at the book, still sitting on my desk, closed and silent. I was waiting for the next sign, the next move in whatever twisted game the Watchers were playing. But nothing came. That night, just as the clock ticked past midnight, my phone buzzed again. Another email. My hands trembled as I opened it, dreading what I might find. The time has come. Complete your initiation. Return to the library. The library again. I knew it was a trap, but I also knew I had no choice. The Watchers had made it clear that running wasn't an option, and the consequences of disobedience weren't something I was willing to risk. With a heavy heart, I grabbed the book in my bag, throwing on a jacket before heading out. The night was cold, the air sharp with the smell of impending rain. As I drove back to the spot where it had all begun, I felt a strange sense of resignation wash over me. Whatever was going to happen, I was ready to face it. I reached the parking lot just before 12:30. It was empty, the same eerie silence hanging over the place. I parked the car and got out, the book clutched tightly in my hand. The street lamp flickered overhead, casting long, wavering shadows across the ground. I didn't need instructions this time. I knew what was expected of me. I walked to the center of the lot, the same spot where I'd placed the book before, and set it down gently on the asphalt. The wind picked up, rustling the pages as I stepped back. For a few moments, nothing happened. The night was still, the only sound the faint hum of the street lamp above. But then, slowly, the book began to glow. It wasn't a bright light, more like a soft, pulsating aura that seemed to emanate from the pages themselves. I watched in awe and terror as the light grew stronger, bathing the entire parking lot in an otherworldly glow. And then I heard it. A voice, not from around me but inside my head. It was deep, resonant, and it spoke with an authority that sent chills down my spine. "You have been chosen." The voice echoed through my mind, each word resonating with a power that I couldn't comprehend. I wanted to run, to get away from whatever was happening, but my feet were rooted to the ground. "The Watchers have observed you. You have passed the tests. Now you will join us." I didn't understand. What tests? What had I passed? All I'd done was follow their instructions out of fear, and now they were telling me I was one of them. The light from the book grew brighter, and the voice continued. "You have shown obedience, resilience, and courage. These are the traits we seek. The initiation is complete. You are now one of the Watchers." I shook my head, trying to deny what I was hearing. This wasn't possible. I didn't want any part of this. I just wanted my life back. But the voice wouldn't let me go. "Embrace your new role. You will watch, as we have watched you. You will guide, as we have guided you. There is no turning back." As the voice spoke, the light from the book began to change, morphing into shapes and symbols that I couldn't understand. They danced in the air, twisting and turning, forming patterns that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the light vanished. The book slammed shut with a force that echoed through the night, leaving me standing there, alone in the darkness. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it, the presence of the Watchers all around me, invisible yet palpable. They were there, observing, waiting. The voice had told me I was one of them now, but I didn't feel any different. I was still just me, confused, scared, and desperate for answers. But I knew that my life had changed, that nothing would ever be the same again. I picked up the book, its cover now cool to the touch, and walked back to my car. As I drove home, the weight of what had happened pressed down on me, suffocating and relentless. I didn't know what being a Watcher meant, didn't know what I was supposed to do now. But one thing was clear, there was no escape from this. When I got home, I placed the book back on my desk and sat down, staring at it, waiting for some sign of what I was supposed to do next. But nothing happened. The book was just a book, and I was left alone with my thoughts. Over the next few days, life went on as usual, but there was an undercurrent of something dark and unsettling that followed me everywhere. I felt watched, always watched, even when I was alone. The world around me seemed different, like I was seeing it through new eyes that weren't entirely my own. And then one morning, as I was getting ready to leave the house, I noticed something new. On my laptop screen, a single line of text had appeared, glowing faintly against the darkness of the screen. "Your first task, observe." I stared at the words, a cold knot forming in my stomach. The watchers were giving me instructions, and I had no choice but to follow them. Whatever they wanted me to observe, I knew it wouldn't be anything good, but I also knew that I couldn't resist. The initiation was over, and my life as I knew it had ended. I was one of them now, bound by forces I couldn't understand. As I sat down at my desk, ready to begin whatever twisted task they had for me, I realized that this was my new reality. I was no longer just the guy who'd gotten curious about the dark web. I was something else, something darker, something I didn't want to be. But I had no choice. I was a watcher. And the watchers, they never stop. I never thought I'd be the type of person to do something so stupid. But desperation does things to people, especially when you're a high school senior on the verge of not graduating. I wasn't a bad student, or at least I didn't think so. I tried hard, but no matter what I did, my grades kept slipping and my chances of getting into a decent college were fading fast. It started with chemistry. No matter how many hours I spent staring at those equations, they just didn't make sense. Then it was math. My teacher, Mr. Allen, was one of those old school guys who thought everyone should understand calculus as easily as breathing. He never offered extra help, and if you didn't get it, you were on your own. I had always been pretty average, but this year, something was different. The pressure was higher, and my focus was all over the place. I remember the exact moment the idea first crossed my mind. I was sitting in my room, surrounded by crumpled papers and half-empty energy drinks. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. What if I could just change my grades? No one would ever know, and I could finally get out of this nightmare. It wasn't like I was trying to cheat the system for fun. I just wanted to make it through the year. I started doing some research. At first, it was just idle curiosity, Googling things like how to hack school grades and hire a hacker to fix grades. Most of the stuff that came up was either fake or way too expensive for a high school kid with barely any allowance. But then, I stumbled onto something deeper, something that led me to a part of the internet I'd only heard about in rumors, the deep web. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I read about it online, heard the stories, but it still felt like a distant, almost mythical place. But after spending hours digging around, I found myself on a site that offered services for almost anything you could imagine. There were people advertising things like stolen credit cards, counterfeit money, and, of course, hackers for hire. It was like opening a door to a whole new world, one I probably shouldn't have even known existed. One ad caught my eye. It was simple and to the point. Hacker for hire, discreet and reliable. No job too small. The price was steep, but not completely out of reach if I dipped into my savings. The guy went by the name Ghost01, and from what I could tell, he was the real deal. There were a few reviews, actual reviews, saying he had done some impressive work. My heart was racing as I debated whether to reach out. I knew it was a bad idea, but I was at the end of my rope. It was either this or face a future of fast food jobs and disappointing my parents. So, I did it. I contacted him. The conversation was short. He asked for my school's name, the system they used, and my login credentials. He didn't ask why or even seem curious. It was just business to him. He assured me it would be done within a week, and I'd never have to worry about it again. I remember feeling this strange mix of relief and terror as I sent the payment. Relief because I thought my problems were finally going to be solved, and terror because I knew I was crossing a line I could never come back from. For the next few days, I was on edge, constantly checking my phone and email for any updates. The anxiety was eating me alive, but I kept telling myself it would all be worth it. I was careful not to mention anything to my friends or family. This was a secret I was taking to the grave. I just had to hold out until I got the confirmation that everything was done. But then, things started getting weird. I noticed a black SUV parked down the street from my house one afternoon. It wasn't the usual neighborhood car, and I swear I saw someone sitting inside, watching. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia. Maybe I was just freaking out because of what I'd done. But then it showed up again the next day and the day after that. Always in the same spot, always at the same time. I tried not to let it get to me, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt like a bad omen. And then, Ghost-01 went silent. The messages that had been coming through almost daily stopped. No updates, no responses to my questions, nothing. Just silence. I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, that he was just busy with other jobs, but the feeling in the pit of my stomach told me otherwise. A week later, my grades hadn't changed, not one bit. I was still failing chemistry and math, and now I had the added stress of wondering if I'd just thrown my money into a black hole, or worse, if I'd been caught. I didn't know what to do. Should I try to contact him again? Should I just wait it out? The uncertainty was killing me. Then, about 10 days after I first reached out to him, I got a message. It wasn't from Ghost-01. It was from someone else. The subject line just said, "We need to talk." I remember feeling my blood turn to ice as I opened it. The message was brief and direct. "We know what you've done. Meet us in the school parking lot after dark. Come alone. Tell no one." That was when I knew I was in way over my head. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and my hands started to shake. My first instinct was to delete the message and pretend I'd never seen it, but I knew that wasn't an option. Whoever had sent it knew what I'd done. They had me, and now they wanted to meet. I read the message over and over, trying to make sense of it. "We know what you've done." It was vague, but specific enough to send my mind spiraling into panic. My thoughts raced. Was this a trap? Could it be the police? Or was it someone else? Someone connected to Ghost-01? The more I thought about it, the more questions piled up. What if they had proof? What if they were going to blackmail me? I considered ignoring it, but I knew that wouldn't make the problem go away. They had me cornered, and whoever they weren't going to let it slide. I had no choice but to do as they said. I needed to figure out who was behind this and what they wanted. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to act normal around my parents, but I could barely focus. Every noise in the house made me jump. I kept glancing at my phone, half expecting another message, but none came. It was just that one ominous line. "We need to talk." The words echoed in my mind like a broken record. When night finally fell, I felt like I was walking into a nightmare. The school parking lot was about a 15-minute walk from my house, but it felt like hours as I made my way there. The streets were quiet, eerily so, and I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting that black SUV to pull up beside me. But the streets were empty. When I got to the school, the place was deserted, just as I expected it would be. The lights in the parking lot were dim, casting long shadows that made everything look distorted and eerie. I could see the outlines of the school building in the distance, its windows dark and lifeless. It was strange to see the place that was usually bustling with students so quiet, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something bad to happen. I stopped at the edge of the parking lot, trying to make out any movement. For a moment I wondered if I was alone, if this was just some sick joke. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure step out from behind one of the parked cars. My heart skipped a beat. The person was dressed in all black, a hood pulled low over their face. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, just that they were tall and moved with a calm, deliberate pace. They approached slowly, stopping a few feet away from me, and for a long moment we just stood there staring at each other. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. "Who are you?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. I hated how scared I sounded, but I couldn't help it. The figure didn't answer right away. They just stood there silent, like they were sizing me up. When they finally spoke, their voice was low, almost a whisper, and completely devoid of emotion. "You're in a lot of trouble, you know that?" I felt a lump form in my throat. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The person took a step closer and I instinctively took a step back. "What I want," they said, "is to make sure you understand the seriousness of what you've done." I swallowed hard. "Are you with the police?" The words tumbled out before I could stop them. It was a stupid question, but I had to know. The figure let out a cold, humorless laugh. "No, I'm not with the police, but they're not far behind if that's what you're worried about." They paused, letting the words sink in. "Ghost 01 got sloppy. He was arrested yesterday. They're going through his records now, tracing every job he's done. Your name is on that list." The blood drained from my face. This was worse than I'd imagined. If what they were saying was true, it was only a matter of time before the authorities showed up at my door. I could see my entire life crumbling in front of me. My future, my family, everything I'd worked for. "But I didn't," I started to say, but the figure cut me off. "Save it. I'm not interested in your excuses. What matters now is what happens next." I felt like the ground was slipping out from under me. "What do you mean?" The figure's voice was icy cold. "You have two choices. One, you come clean. Go to the police, tell them everything, and hope for leniency. Or two, you keep your mouth shut and deal with the consequences when they come knocking. Either way, you're done." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't think straight. My mind was racing with all the worst-case scenarios. I imagined my parents finding out, the shame, the disappointment in their eyes. I imagined getting expelled, having to explain to everyone why I wouldn't be graduating. And worse, I imagined the police, the questions, the charges. My stomach churned with fear. "But why are you telling me this?" I asked, desperate to understand why this person was even here talking to me. The figure was silent for a moment. Then they sighed. "Because I've seen kids like you before. Kids who make stupid decisions out of desperation. You think you're the only one? Trust me, you're not. But this is different. You're playing with fire, and you're about to get burned." I didn't know what to say. Everything was happening so fast, and I felt like I was drowning in the gravity of what I'd done. "Listen," the figure continued, their voice softening just a fraction. "You're in a tough spot, but you can still make a choice. Do the right thing, and maybe, just maybe, you'll get out of this with your life intact. Or don't, and let it all fall apart. But either way, you need to face the consequences of your actions." I stood there, frozen, as the figure stepped back into the shadows. "Think about it," they said, their voice fading into the darkness, "but don't take too long. Time's running out." And then they were gone, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared, leaving me alone in the empty parking lot with nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the weight of the decision that now lay on my shoulders. When I got back home that night, I felt like I was sleepwalking. My body was on autopilot, moving through the motions, but my mind was a swirling mess of fear and uncertainty. I barely slept, tossing and turning as I replayed the encounter in the parking lot, over and over again in my head. By the time morning came, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. But I knew I couldn't avoid school. Not today. Walking into the school building that morning felt surreal, like I was walking through a dream. Everything seemed normal. Kids were chatting in the halls, teachers were setting up for the day. But to me, everything felt off. The weight of what I had done was pressing down on me, and every face I saw felt like it was looking right through me, like they all somehow knew what I'd done. I tried to keep my head down, to avoid eye contact with anyone. The last thing I needed was for someone to start asking questions. But even as I walked to my first class, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The whole day I was on edge, jumping at every loud noise, every sudden movement. It felt like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the inevitable moment when everything would come crashing down. And then, in the middle of third period, it did. It started with an announcement over the intercom, calling several students to the office. I remember the exact words. Will Jack Thompson, Emily Miller, and Ryan Hayes please report to the principal's office immediately? My heart skipped a beat when I heard my name. I looked around the classroom and I could feel every eye on me. My teacher gave me a puzzled look, but I could barely meet her gaze. My legs felt like they were made of lead as I stood up and gathered my things. The walk to the principal's office felt like a death march. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what was happening. Had they already found out? Was this it? As I turned the corner and saw the office doors ahead of me, I noticed Jack and Emily walking just a few steps ahead. They both looked as confused as I felt, which only made my anxiety worse. When we got to the office, the secretary gave us a tight smile and gestured for us to sit down. "Mr. Harris will be with you in a moment," she said, her voice calm but with an undertone of something else, something that made my stomach turn. We sat there in silence, the three of us exchanging nervous glances but not saying a word. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the quiet room, each second dragging on like an eternity. Finally, the door to the principal's office opened, and Mr. Harris stepped out. He was an older man, stern but fair, and usually the type to smile and make small talk. But today his face was grim. "Come in," he said, his voice flat. My heart sank even further. We filed into the office, and I couldn't help but notice how small the room felt with all of us crammed inside. Mr. Harris gestured for us to sit in the 3 chairs in front of his desk. The walls were lined with framed certificates and photos of past students, all smiling and proud, a stark contrast to the tension filling the room. Mr. Harris sat down behind his desk and folded his hands in front of him. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at each of us in turn, as if deciding how to start. The silence was unbearable. I could feel the sweat on the back of my neck, and my hands were trembling slightly. "Do any of you know why you're here?" he finally asked, his voice calm but with an edge to it that made my stomach drop. None of us answered. We all just shook our heads, though I could tell from the look on Jack's face that he was just as nervous as I was. Emily looked like she might cry. Mr. Harris sighed, leaning back in his chair. "This is serious," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "It's come to our attention that someone has been attempting to access the school's grading system without authorization. We've been contacted by the authorities, and there's a very serious investigation underway." My heart stopped. This was it. I was done. But why were Jack and Emily here? What did they have to do with this? Mr. Harris continued, "Now I'm going to ask you all some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. This is not the time to hide anything. The police will be involved, and it's in your best interest to cooperate fully." I could barely breathe. I could feel the walls closing in, the reality of what I had done crashing down on me. I wanted to say something, to confess, but the words were stuck in my throat. "Jack," Mr. Harris said, turning to him first, "have you ever tried to access the school's computer system outside of normal use?" Jack looked horrified. "No, sir, I would never. I don't even know how to do that kind of stuff." Mr. Harris nodded, but his expression didn't change. He asked Emily the same question, and she shook her head, looking like she might burst into tears at any moment. Then he turned to me. "Ryan, what about you?" I felt every eye in the room on me, and the weight of their gaze was almost too much to bear. I knew I was caught. There was no getting out of this. But even as I opened my mouth to speak, the door to the office opened, and the school resource officer walked in, followed by 2 men in suits. The room went silent. The officer looked at Mr. Harris and nodded, then turned to us. "We need to speak with Ryan Hayes," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. That was it, the end of the line. I stood up on shaky legs, my heart pounding in my chest, and followed them out of the office. As we walked down the hall, I could see other students watching from their classrooms, their faces pressed against the glass. I knew what they were thinking. They were seeing me as the kid who had done something terrible, something unforgivable. The rest of the day was a blur. They took me to a small room and asked me questions. So many questions, they knew everything. The payment to Ghost 01, the messages, everything. They had all the evidence they needed, and there was no point in denying it. I confessed to everything. By the time they were done, my parents had arrived. I could see the shock and disappointment in their eyes as they listened to the officers explain what I had done. My mom looked like she might faint, and my dad just kept shaking his head, unable to believe what he was hearing. They told me I was suspended immediately, pending further disciplinary action, which could include expulsion. The school had a zero-tolerance policy for this kind of thing, and they were making an example out of me. The police didn't arrest me on the spot, but they made it clear that there would be legal consequences. My parents would likely have to pay a fine, and I could be charged with a misdemeanor, which would stay on my record for the rest of my life. As we left the school that day, I felt like my entire world had crumbled to dust. The weight of my actions hung over me like a dark cloud, and I knew there was no going back. I had made a mistake, a terrible, life-changing mistake, and now I had to live with the consequences. The days after my suspension were some of the darkest I'd ever experienced. The house, usually filled with the sounds of TV or my mom cooking in the kitchen, was eerily quiet. My parents barely spoke to me, and when they did, it was strained, their words clipped and heavy with disappointment. My mom's eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and my dad, well, he just seemed like a different person altogether. He wasn't the type to yell or get angry, but the silence between us was worse. It was like a wall had gone up, and I wasn't sure it would ever come down. The first morning after, I woke up, and for a brief, blissful moment, I forgot what had happened. But then it all came flooding back, and the pit in my stomach returned. I didn't know what to do with myself. I couldn't go to school, and I wasn't sure I'd ever be going back. The reality of it all hit me in waves. What this meant for my future, for my family. I tried to distract myself, but nothing worked. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the disappointed faces of my parents, the cold, calculating look of the men who had interrogated me, and the smirking faces of my classmates as they watched me being escorted out of school. The worst part was knowing that everyone knew. The news spread like wildfire, and by the end of the day, everyone in school, and likely the entire town, knew what I had done. I avoided social media entirely, too afraid to see what people were saying. I didn't want to see the jokes, the memes, the cruel comments. I didn't want to face the reality that my life as I knew it was over. It wasn't long before the letters and calls started coming in. The school district sent an official notice that I was to be expelled. There would be a hearing, but everyone knew it was just a formality. The school board had a strict no-tolerance policy for breaches of security, and they weren't going to bend the rules for me. My parents tried to appeal, but it was clear from the start that it was a losing battle. The police, too, were a constant presence in our lives now. They made it clear that while I wouldn't be going to jail, the charges were serious. Unauthorized access to school systems, tampering with records. These weren't just school violations, they were crimes. I was looking at a hefty fine and a permanent mark on my record, something that would follow me for the rest of my life. But the worst part was the effect it had on my family. We weren't rich by any means, and the fines, legal fees, and everything else were going to put a huge strain on us. My parents tried to shield me from it, but I could see the worry in their eyes, the late-night conversations that stopped the moment I walked into the room. My mom stopped cooking dinner, and we ate takeout almost every night, sitting in silence, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. My friends, or at least the people I thought were my friends, started distancing themselves from me. At first, I thought it was just because they didn't know what to say, but as the days passed, it became clear that they didn't want to be associated with me. The texts stopped coming, The invites dried up, and soon I was completely alone. It was like I'd become a ghost in my own life, the person I used to be fading away into nothingness. One afternoon, a few days after the suspension, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The house was suffocating and I needed to get out, even if just for a little while. I wandered aimlessly through the neighborhood, avoiding the streets where I might run into anyone from school. I ended up at the park, sitting on a bench and watching the world go by. Kids were playing, parents were chatting, and for a moment, it felt like everything was normal. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a group of kids from my school. They were laughing, carefree, like nothing had changed. And why would it have? Their lives were still on track, their futures secure. I wasn't prepared for what happened next. One of them noticed me sitting there and whispered something to the others. They all turned to look at me, and I could see the sneers on their faces. I didn't know these kids well, just some people I'd seen around school, but their looks cut through me like a knife. One of them, a guy I vaguely recognized from my chemistry class, walked over and stood in front of me, arms crossed, a mocking smile on his face. "Hey Ryan," he said loud enough for everyone around to hear. "How's it feel to be the school's biggest loser?" I didn't answer. I just looked down at my feet, hoping he'd go away. But he didn't. He leaned in closer, his voice dripping with malice. "I heard you're getting expelled. That's gotta suck. What are you gonna do now? Flip burgers for the rest of your life?" His words stung, but I didn't let him see it. I knew that reacting would only make it worse. He waited for a response, and when I didn't give him one, he laughed, a cold, cruel sound that echoed in my ears long after he walked away. That was the last time I left the house for a while. The humiliation was too much to bear. I stayed in my room, hiding from the world, hoping that somehow this would all just go away. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't. This was my reality now, and there was no escaping it. The hearing came and went, just as I'd expected. My parents and I sat in the small, stuffy room, facing a panel of stern-faced adults who had already made up their minds. They listened to the facts, nodded at the appropriate moments, and when it was over, they delivered the verdict. I was officially expelled. I would not be graduating with my class, and my chances of getting into any decent college were now non-existent. My future had been ripped away, all because of one stupid, desperate decision. The drive home was silent. My mom was crying, quietly, and my dad just stared straight ahead, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. I felt like I was drowning, suffocating under the weight of my own guilt and shame. I wanted to apologize, to tell them how sorry I was, but the words stuck in my throat. What could I say that would make any of this better? Nothing. There was nothing I could do. When we got home, my dad finally spoke. His voice was low, calm, but there was a sadness in it that cut me to the core. "Ryan," he said, turning to look at me, "you need to understand that actions have consequences. What you did, it's going to affect you for the rest of your life, but it's also affecting us. This isn't just your burden to bear. It's ours too." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. I wanted to tell him I understood, but I didn't. Not really. I was too caught up in my own misery to fully grasp the impact this had on them. But I knew one thing. I had let them down in a way that I could never fix. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened, the choices I'd made, the people I'd hurt. I didn't sleep much. I couldn't. The reality of what I'd done was too overwhelming. And then, in the darkness, I realized something. This wasn't just about what I had done, it was about what I was going to do next. I had messed up badly, but I couldn't just give up. I had to find a way to move forward, to make something of the mess I'd made. But how? I had no idea where to start. The days following my expulsion were some of the hardest of my life. It felt like I was living in the aftermath of a storm that had left everything in ruins. My parents were still struggling to come to terms with what had happened, and I couldn't blame them. I had shattered their trust, and rebuilding it seemed impossible. The weight of my actions pressed down on me every single day, making it hard to even get out of bed in the morning. But I knew I couldn't stay like this forever. As much as I wanted to, I couldn't just hide in my room and pretend the world didn't exist. I had to face the reality of what I had done and try somehow to move forward. The first step was the hardest, admitting to myself that I had messed up and that the only person who could start fixing things was me. It began with a simple conversation with my parents. I sat them down one evening after dinner, my heart pounding in my chest, and told them everything. Not just the facts. They already knew those. But how I was feeling, how scared and lost I was. I told them how deeply sorry I was for what I had done, not just to myself, but to them as well. I didn't expect them to forgive me right away, and honestly, I didn't deserve it, but they listened, really listened. And for the first time since everything had happened, I felt like there was a small glimmer of hope. My dad was the first to speak. "Ryan," he said, his voice soft but firm, "we're hurt and we're angry, but more than anything, we're worried about you. We want you to understand that while what you did was wrong, it doesn't define who you are. What matters now is what you do next." Those words stuck with me, what I do next. It was clear that I couldn't undo the past, but I could control what happened going forward. And that's when I made a decision. I was going to make things right, as much as I could, and that started with taking responsibility. The next morning I called the school and asked to speak with Mr. Harris. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, but I knew I needed to apologize. He agreed to meet with me, and when I walked into his office, the weight of everything hit me again. The last time I'd been there, I was full of fear and shame. This time I was determined to own up to my mistakes. "Mr. Harris," I began, my voice shaking a little. "I just wanted to say how sorry I am for everything I did. I know I broke the rules and I put the school at risk. I understand now how serious my actions were, and I take full responsibility. I'm not asking for any favors or for you to change your mind about the expulsion. I just needed to tell you that I'm truly sorry." Mr. Harris looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed and nodded. "Ryan, it takes courage to come here and say that. What you did was wrong, and there are consequences for those actions, but I believe you when you say you're sorry. I hope you take this experience and learn from it, so you can move forward and make better choices in the future." I thanked him, and as I left his office, I felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next few weeks were all about finding a new direction. I knew I wouldn't be going back to school, so I started looking into alternatives. My parents and I discussed enrolling me in an online program so I could at least finish my high school education. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing. The program allowed me to work at my own pace, and while it wasn't the same as being in a classroom with my friends, it was something. It gave me a purpose, a goal to work towards. But school wasn't the only thing I needed to focus on. I knew I had to make amends for what I had done, not just with my parents, but with the community as well. I started volunteering at a local community center, helping out with after-school programs for kids. It was strange at first, being around kids who looked up to me when I felt like I was the last person anyone should admire. But over time, I began to see the impact I could have in a positive way. It felt good to do something right, something that could actually help others instead of hurting them. My parents were hesitant at first, worried that I was taking on too much, but as they saw how committed I was, they started to come around. The tension in the house slowly began to ease, and while things weren't back to normal, there was a sense that maybe, just maybe, we could get through this together. One evening, a few months after everything had happened, my dad came into my room. He handed me a small box, looking a bit uncomfortable. "I know this has been a rough year for you, for all of us," he said, but your mom and I are proud of the way you've handled things since everything. We wanted to give you something to show that we believe in you, that we know you're going to get through this." I opened the box to find a simple silver watch inside. It wasn't anything fancy, but it meant the world to me. I looked up at my dad, and for the first time in months, I saw a hint of the pride he used to have in me. "Thanks, Dad," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I won't let you down." The road to redemption was a long one, and I knew I wasn't done yet. I had a lot of work to do to rebuild my life, to prove to myself and to everyone else that I could be better. But I was determined to do it. I had made a terrible mistake, but I wasn't going to let it define the rest of my life. Looking back, I can't say I'm glad it happened, but I can say that it taught me more about myself than I ever thought possible. I learned that actions have consequences, and that no matter how far you fall, you can always find a way to stand back up. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but with the right mindset and the support of the people who care about you, it's possible. In the end, that's what life is about: making mistakes, learning from them, and trying to be a better person tomorrow than you were today. And while I'll always carry the weight of what I did, I'm also carrying the lessons I learned. That's something no one can take away from me. I'm not usually the type to do something stupid on a whim, but there's a first time for everything, right? It all started last Friday after work. I had heard about the dark web before, like most people do, from those YouTube videos or online horror stories. Most of them seemed like urban legends, stories about hitmen, bizarre cults, or illegal markets selling God knows what. But part of me, the curious part, wanted to see what all the fuss was about. I guess boredom played a role too. I didn't want to take any risks by browsing the dark web from home, so I decided to head to an old internet cafe across town. It was the only one I knew that still existed. I hadn't been there in years, but I figured it was a safe bet. Anonymity in an anonymous place. When I arrived, it was like stepping back into the early 2000s. The smell of stale coffee, the hum of outdated computers, and the flickering fluorescent lights made the place feel more like a time capsule than a functional business. Only a couple of other people were there, each lost in their own screen. No one seemed to care that a new face had walked in. I picked a computer near the back, far away from the entrance, where I wouldn't be disturbed. I booted up the old machine and noticed it was running some antiquated version of Windows. It took a few tries to connect to the Wi-Fi, but once I did, I downloaded Tor. It felt almost too easy. Within minutes, I was inside the dark web, navigating its strange, unfamiliar interface. It wasn't as flashy or high-tech as I imagined. It was more like an underground market, with pages that looked like they were straight out of the early internet, plain text, basic HTML, no real visuals to speak of. But that somehow made it creepier. I started by browsing some forums. Most of it was harmless, albeit weird. People talking about conspiracy theories, swapping pirated software, and sharing coded messages. It was like a digital ghost town, where only the strange and paranoid seemed to gather. But then I found a link to a chat room. It had a cryptic name, something like the Mirror Room. Out of morbid curiosity, I clicked on it. The room was nearly empty, just a few people in there, each with a username that looked like random strings of numbers and letters. I didn't know what I was doing, so I just watched the conversation for a while. Most of it was just random chatter, people asking for links or trading illegal stuff. I thought about leaving, but then someone posted a message that caught my eye. It was just a simple sentence, but it sent a chill down my spine. "I can see you." For a second, I thought it was some sort of inside joke, but then another message appeared, this time directly aimed at me, using my username, which I had created just minutes earlier. "Nice shirt, John." My heart skipped a beat. I was wearing a dark green flannel, something I thought was pretty nondescript. I quickly looked around the cafe. There was no one near me, and the other patrons were still glued to their screens, oblivious to what was happening. I wanted to convince myself it was a prank, that someone had somehow hacked the webcam on my computer, But this PC didn't even have a webcam. My thoughts started racing, and just as I was about to log off, another message popped up. You really should have picked a different cafe, John Doe. This time it included my full name. My stomach dropped. I hadn't used my real name online, not even close. My hands started shaking as I quickly typed out, "Who are you?" No response. The chat went completely silent. I panicked and shut down the computer as fast as I could. My hands were sweating, and my mind was spinning with 1,000 questions. I practically ran out of the cafe, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I needed to get home, somewhere I felt safe. I jumped in my car, fumbling with the keys as I tried to start the engine. My mind was racing. How did they know my name? How did they know what I was wearing? It didn't make any sense. As I pulled out of the parking lot, my phone buzzed. I ignored it, focusing on the road, but it buzzed again and again. I was too freaked out to check it. My knuckles were white as I gripped the steering wheel, trying to calm down. But then it buzzed a fourth time, and against my better judgment, I glanced at the screen. It was a message from an unknown number. My heart sank as I opened it. It was a picture of me, taken just seconds ago, sitting in my car in the parking lot of the cafe. I slammed on the brakes, my breath caught in my throat. The world seemed to tilt, and for a moment, I felt like I might pass out. I didn't know what to do, who to call, or where to go. My mind was a blur of fear and confusion. In a blind panic, I floored the gas pedal, speeding down the road, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and that place. But my fear had taken control. I wasn't paying attention to where I was going. Then, out of nowhere, I saw the tree. I yanked the steering wheel to the side, but it was too late. The car spun out of control and smashed into it head on. The impact jolted me, but somehow I wasn't hurt. I sat there, dazed and trembling. The front of my car crumpled against the tree trunk. My heart was racing and I felt like I couldn't breathe. But I was alive. And that was all that mattered, right? I wish I could say that was the end of it. But things were about to get much worse. Sitting there in the wrecked car, the reality of what just happened began to settle in. The car was totaled, but that wasn't my biggest concern. My phone had slipped out of my hand during the crash, and it was now lying face down on the floor of the passenger seat. I didn't want to pick it up. I was terrified of what might be waiting on the screen. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The eerie silence after the crash was unsettling, broken only by the faint creaking of the damaged metal around me. My head was pounding, not from any injury, but from sheer panic. What was I supposed to do? Who could I even tell about this? It felt too surreal to be happening. Eventually, I forced myself to retrieve the phone. My hands were still shaking as I unlocked it. I almost wished I hadn't. There were more messages, each one worse than the last. The first was another picture, this time of my car at the moment of impact, taken from the same angle as the last one. The timestamp was only seconds old. Whoever was doing this, they were still watching me. I scrolled down, hoping to find some clue about who was tormenting me. Instead, I found another message, this one just as cryptic and terrifying as the others. Running won't help, John. My heart pounded in my chest. They knew where I was, what I was doing. But how? I glanced around, looking for anything out of place. A car parked nearby, someone hiding in the bushes, anything that could explain how they were tracking me. But the street was empty. There was no one around, just the quiet, dimly lit road and the dark trees looming over me. I realized then that staying put wasn't an option. I needed to get out of there, away from wherever they might be watching me. I pulled out my phone again and dialed 911, but before I could even hit call, another message popped up. Don't call anyone, John. We're closer than you think. That was it. I dropped the phone like it was burning my hand and scrambled to get out of the car. My legs felt weak, barely able to hold me up as I stumbled onto the road. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, each thud echoing through my head like a drum. I needed to calm down, to think rationally, but every nerve in my body was screaming at me to run, to get as far away from that place as possible. I looked down the road, trying to figure out where to go. I wasn't far from home, maybe a 15-minute walk, but I didn't want to go back there, not when they could be watching. Instead, I started walking in the opposite direction, heading for the main road where I hoped I'd find some semblance of safety. It was late, and the streets were deserted, adding to the eerie, unsettling feeling that I was being hunted. Every shadow seemed to move. Every distant sound made me jump. I kept checking behind me, expecting to see someone following, but there was nothing. The silence was suffocating. I wished for some sign of life, anything that would break the tension and let me know I wasn't alone in this nightmare. As I walked, I tried to piece together how this could be happening. Was this some elaborate prank? Had I somehow stumbled into a hacker's trap? The logical part of my brain tried to offer explanations, but none of them made sense. The dark web was full of horror stories, but I never believed any of them were real. Not until now. Finally, I reached the main road, a long stretch of asphalt lined with dim streetlights. I felt a small surge of relief seeing it. There were gas stations and fast food joints that stayed open late. There might even be people there. I picked up my pace, eager to get somewhere with more light, more activity. As I approached a 24-hour convenience store, I noticed something strange. A car was parked out front, engine idling, but there was no one inside. The door to the store was open, but I couldn't see anyone behind the counter either. My nerves were already on edge, and the sight of the empty car set them off again. It felt like a trap, like I was being lured into some kind of ambush. But I couldn't turn back. I needed help, or at least a place to gather my thoughts. I walked up to the entrance, glancing nervously around. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside, the sound startlingly loud in the quiet night. The store was empty, shelves lined with the usual late-night essentials, chips, drinks, and a few basic groceries. I called out, hoping the clerk was in the back, but no one answered. I stepped behind the counter, looking for a phone or something I could use to call for help, but before I could find anything, my phone buzzed again. I froze, dread washing over me like a cold wave. I didn't want to look, but I had to. With trembling hands, I pulled the phone from my pocket and read the new message. "Don't hide, John. We know where you are." My blood ran cold. They were still watching, still one step ahead. I didn't know what they wanted or how far they were willing to go, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep running forever. Part of me wanted to leave the store, to just keep walking until I was miles away from everything. But another part of me, the part that was still thinking rationally, knew I needed help. I couldn't fight this alone. I needed to find someone, anyone, who could help me figure out what was going on. I stood there, caught between fight and flight, unsure of what to do next. But whatever choice I made, I knew one thing. I had to do it fast, before they found me again. Standing there in that empty convenience store, I realized that I had to make a decision. The messages were getting more direct, more threatening, and I couldn't just ignore them. I had no idea who they were, but I knew they were watching, waiting for me to make my next move. My heart pounded in my chest as I considered my options. I couldn't stay there forever, and I certainly couldn't keep running aimlessly. I needed a plan. I figured the best course of action was to find someone, anyone who could help. Maybe if I wasn't alone, I'd feel safer, or at least a little more in control. I grabbed a bottle of water from the shelf, my throat was dry from panic, and made my way to the exit, hoping that the eerie quiet outside was just in my head. As I stepped out, I noticed the car parked out front was still there, engine idling. My gut told me something was off. I decided to approach cautiously, walking around the side of the store instead of directly into the open. As I moved, I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone watching me. but the street was as deserted as before. When I reached the car, I could see it more clearly. It was an old sedan, paint chipped and windows slightly tinted. The driver's side door was open just a crack, but there was no one in the driver's seat. The interior light was on, illuminating an empty space where someone should have been. My mind raced with possibilities. Did they leave? Were they waiting for me? Despite my better judgment, I peered into the car. There was nothing inside. No bags, no signs of a struggle, just a couple of fast food wrappers on the floor. But then I noticed something on the passenger seat that made my blood run cold. It was my name written on a piece of paper in thick black marker. My full name, just like in the messages, with a simple sentence beneath it. Stay where you are. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. This wasn't just some random person messing with me. Whoever this was, they were playing a game, and I was the unwilling participant. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This was far more serious than I had imagined. I had to get out of there. My legs felt like they were made of lead, but I forced myself to move, heading back down the street in the direction I had come from. The store was no longer an option, and neither was standing around waiting for something else to happen. I needed to find a place where I could gather my thoughts, somewhere that didn't feel like I was walking into another trap. As I walked, I scanned the area for any sign of life. The houses around here were dark, most of them looking like their occupants had long since gone to bed. I couldn't just start banging on doors asking for help. That would probably freak someone out, and I didn't want to make things worse. But then, just ahead, I saw a faint light glowing from a small diner at the corner of the block. It was one of those 24-hour joints, the kind that serves truckers and late-night workers who need a break from the road. I picked up my pace, praying that someone inside could help me, or at least that I'd find some comfort in being around other people. When I pushed open the door, the bell above it tinkled, and the warm smell of frying bacon and coffee hit me. There were only a few people inside, a couple sitting in a booth near the back and an older man at the counter, hunched over a newspaper. The waitress behind the counter gave me a quick glance, probably noticing how disheveled I looked, but didn't say anything as I walked in. I slid into a booth near the door, keeping my back to the wall so I could see the entrance. My heart was still racing, but the familiar sounds of a diner, sizzling from the kitchen, the low hum of a radio playing oldies, helped calm me down, if only a little. The waitress came over, a tired smile on her face. "What can I get you, hun?" she asked, pulling out a pad and pencil. "Just a coffee," I replied, my voice sounding weaker than I'd intended. "Black, please." She nodded and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I took out my phone again, hesitating before unlocking it. The screen was still lit up with that last terrifying message. Stay where you are. I wanted to throw the phone away to pretend this wasn't happening, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. As I stared at the screen, a new message popped up, causing me to jump. "Nice diner choice, John. Hope you're enjoying your coffee." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. They knew I was here, they were still watching, but how? There was no one outside, no sign of anyone following me. I glanced around the diner again, but the few people there didn't seem to pay any attention to me. The couple in the back was lost in their conversation. The old man at the counter was still engrossed in his paper, and the waitress was busy refilling the sugar containers. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there and wait for the next message, the next threat. I thought about asking the waitress for help, but what could she do? Call the police? I didn't even know what I'd tell them. Someone on the dark web was stalking me. It sounded crazy, even to me. But then, as I was considering my options, the door to the diner opened, and a man walked in. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over his face. He moved with purpose, heading straight for the counter without glancing around. My heart leapt into my throat. Was this them? Was this the person who had been sending the messages? I tried to stay calm, but every nerve in my body was on high alert. I watched him carefully, waiting to see what he would do. The man didn't sit down. Instead, he walked over to the counter, leaned in close to the waitress, and whispered something. She glanced at me, her expression shifting to something that looked almost like fear, before nodding and turning back to the kitchen. My mind raced. What had he said to her? Was he talking about me? I didn't have to wait long to find out. The man turned, pulling back his hood just enough for me to see his face. A face I didn't recognize, but one that filled me with dread nonetheless. He had a cold, calculating look in his eyes, the kind of look that told me he wasn't here for a friendly chat. Before I could react, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, holding it up just enough for me to see. My stomach dropped when I saw what was on it. My name, written in the same bold black letters as the note in the car. He didn't say a word, just stared at me, letting the message sink in. Then, as quickly as he had appeared, he turned and walked out of the diner, leaving me frozen in place. I wanted to follow him, to demand answers, but my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed by fear, by the realization that this was real. Someone was really coming after me, and they were getting closer. The waitress came over a moment later, setting the coffee in front of me with a shaky hand. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, but I knew she could see the fear in my eyes. "Did he say something to you?" I managed to ask. She hesitated, glancing toward the door. "He just told me to give you this." She reached into her apron and pulled out another slip of paper, placing it on the table before walking away quickly, as if she didn't want to be involved any more than she already was. She hesitated, glancing toward the door. "He just told me to give you this." She reached into her apron and pulled out another slip of paper, placing it on the table before walking away quickly, as if she didn't want to be involved any more than she already was. I stared at the paper for what felt like an eternity, dreading what it might say. Finally, with trembling hands, I unfolded it and read the message. "Time's running out, John. You can't hide forever." I knew then that this wasn't just a game. Whatever was happening, it was serious, and I was running out of options. The fear that had been gnawing at me since the cafe was now overwhelming, and I had no idea what to do next. I sat in that diner booth for what felt like hours, staring at the note as the words echoed in my head. "Time's running out, John. You can't hide forever." It was like a ticking clock, counting down to some inevitable, horrifying event. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Whoever this was, they weren't just watching. They were closing in, and I was running out of time to figure out why. I knew I couldn't stay there much longer. The waitress kept glancing at me from behind the counter, her nervous eyes betraying that she didn't want any more trouble. I couldn't blame her. I didn't want to drag anyone else into this mess. But I couldn't just walk out into the night either. The man who had left that note could be waiting for me outside, or worse, someone else could be. I decided to take a moment to collect myself. I sipped the coffee, letting the bitter warmth steady my shaking hands. As I did, I considered my options. I could call the police, but what would I even say? That someone was following me, sending me messages on the dark web? They'd probably chalk it up to some prank, or worse, think I was losing it. No, I needed more than just vague suspicions. I needed something concrete. That's when an idea struck me. The internet cafe, the one where this all started. Maybe there was something there, something I missed, that could help me make sense of this nightmare. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead I had. Plus, the place was likely empty by now, giving me a chance to look around without drawing too much attention. I threw some money on the table, enough to cover the coffee and a decent tip for the waitress, and headed for the door. The night air hit me like a cold slap, instantly sobering the fog of fear that had been clouding my thoughts. The street was as deserted as before, and there was no sign of the man who had delivered the note. I took that as a small mercy. As I made my way back to my car, still damaged but drivable, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone to jump out from the shadows, but nothing happened. The street remained eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I got in the car, started the engine, and pulled away, trying to keep my mind focused on the task at hand. The drive to the internet cafe was a blur. My thoughts were a jumbled mess of fear and confusion, but one thing was clear: I needed answers. As I approached the cafe, the familiar neon sign flickered dimly in the distance, casting an unsettling glow over the empty parking lot. The place looked even more run down than before, as if it had aged years in the few hours since I'd last been there. I parked the car and took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves before stepping out. The windows of the cafe were dark, and the sign on the door said "closed," but I knew better. Places like this didn't really close, they just pretended to. I walked up to the door and, with some reluctance, gave it a gentle push. To my surprise, it creaked open without resistance. Inside, the cafe was almost exactly as I'd left it: dim, quiet, and reeking of stale coffee. The computers were still on, their screens casting an eerie glow over the worn-out desks. I half expected to see someone sitting there, watching me, but the place was empty. That didn't do much to calm my nerves. I walked over to the computer I had used earlier, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. The chair squeaked as I sat down, and I quickly logged back into the system. My heart was racing as I navigated through the history, hoping to find something that would explain how everything had gone so horribly wrong. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary. The usual browser history, a few opened tabs. Nothing that screamed, "This is it." But then, as I scrolled through the logs, I found something that didn't make sense. There was a program running in the background, something I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't a browser or anything that should have been there. It was a script, something with a long, cryptic name made up of random letters and numbers. My pulse quickened as I clicked on it, revealing a text file filled with what looked like lines of code, interspersed with what seemed like timestamps. I didn't know much about coding, but even I could tell this wasn't just some harmless program. There were references to IP addresses, encrypted links, and, chillingly, coordinates. The coordinates were the first thing that caught my eye. I quickly copied them and pasted them into a map application, praying they wouldn't lead anywhere. But they did. The location was less than a mile from where I was sitting, in the middle of a residential neighborhood I didn't recognize. My stomach twisted into knots. What was this? Why were there coordinates? And why here? I couldn't make sense of it, but I knew I had to find out. As I sat there staring at the screen, another thought crossed my mind. What if this was a trap? What if whoever was behind this wanted me to find these coordinates, to lead me somewhere I shouldn't go? But if that were the case, why leave the information in such an obvious place? Before I could think it over any further, my phone buzzed again, making me jump. I had almost forgotten about it in the chaos of the last few minutes. With a sinking feeling, I unlocked it and read the new message. "Good. Now come and see what we've been waiting to show you." The message sent chills down my spine. They knew I had found the coordinates. They were expecting me. But for what? My brain screamed at me to stop, to leave the cafe and drive as far away as possible. But another part of me, the part that needed answers, pushed me forward. Against my better judgment, I printed out the map with the coordinates and stuffed it into my pocket. I shut down the computer, not wanting to leave any trace of what I had discovered, and made my way back to the car. The drive to the location was short, but it felt like an eternity. Every shadow seemed to stretch and reach out. Every distant noise made my heart race. I kept the radio off, the silence of the car amplifying the pounding of my heart. When I arrived at the coordinates, I found myself in front of an old, abandoned house. It was the kind of place kids dared each other to enter on Halloween. Windows boarded up, paint peeling off the walls, the front yard overgrown with weeds. The house looked like it had been empty for years, but the faint glow of a single light from inside told me otherwise. I parked a little ways down the street, not wanting to draw attention to myself, and walked cautiously toward the house. The night was eerily quiet, the only sound being the crunch of gravel under my feet. I reached the front door, which was slightly ajar, and hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back to forget this ever happened, but I couldn't. I needed to know what was inside. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the floorboards creaked under my weight. The light I had seen from outside was coming from a single, flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling in what looked like the living room. There was nothing else in the room. No furniture, no decorations, just the light and the overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. I took a step forward, my breath catching in my throat, and that's when I heard it. A low, almost imperceptible whisper coming from somewhere deeper in the house. It was a voice, but I couldn't make out the words. My heart was racing again, every nerve on edge. But I had come this far. I couldn't turn back now. I followed the sound, moving slowly through the empty rooms. The whispering grew louder as I approached a doorway at the end of the hall. It was dark beyond the threshold, and I couldn't see what was on the other side. But the voice was there, calling me, drawing me in. I reached the doorway, my hand trembling as I reached for the light switch. When I flipped it, the room was flooded with a dim yellow light, revealing something that made my blood run cold. In the center of the room was a table, and on that table was a laptop, its screen glowing faintly in the darkness. But it wasn't the laptop that terrified me. It was what was displayed on the screen. It was a live feed showing me, standing in the doorway, staring at the screen. Before I could react, the whispering stopped, and a new message appeared on the screen. "We've been waiting for you, John. Welcome home." My breath caught in my throat. Home? What did they mean? My mind was spinning, unable to process what was happening. But then, as I stood there frozen in fear, the door behind me creaked open, and I felt a presence looming just inches away. I didn't dare turn around. I couldn't. Whatever was behind me, it was the reason I had been brought here. And somehow, deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. In that moment, standing in the dim light of that empty room with a presence looming behind me, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. My body was frozen, muscles locked in place as if they refused to acknowledge the terrifying reality unfolding around me. The screen in front of me showed my own terrified reflection, captured in real time by some unseen camera. The message still glowed ominously on the laptop. "We've been waiting for you, John. Welcome home." But home? This place was anything but. It was a decaying shell, a forgotten house that had seen better days decades ago. Yet somehow, the word home sent a chill down my spine that was deeper than any of the threats or pictures I'd received. It was like it was speaking to some part of me that I couldn't quite remember or didn't want to. The presence behind me didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just waited, as if it knew that I would have to turn around eventually. I had no choice. I had to confront whatever or whoever was standing there. My mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Was it the man from the diner? The person who had sent those messages? Or was it something even more sinister? Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I slowly turned around. My heart pounded in my chest, every beat louder than the last. When I finally faced the door, what I saw wasn't what I had expected. It was nothing. The doorway was empty, the hall beyond as silent and dark as before. The oppressive presence I had felt just moments ago seemed to evaporate into the air, leaving me alone in the room. My mind struggled to make sense of it. Had it been my imagination? A trick of the light? Or was something else at play here? Something I couldn't comprehend. I turned back to the laptop, hoping for some kind of explanation. The screen had gone dark, the live feed replaced by a new message. "Don't be afraid, John. We've always been with you." My breath caught in my throat. Always. The word resonated in my mind. stirring up memories that I had long buried. Flashes of childhood, fleeting images of dark corners, shadows that had seemed too solid, too alive. Memories I had dismissed as nightmares, as tricks my mind had played on me as a child. But now they came rushing back with terrifying clarity. It wasn't just the dark web, the messages, or the stalker. It was something much deeper, something that had been lurking in the background of my life for as long as I could remember. The feeling of being watched, of not being alone even in the safest places. All those moments of inexplicable fear, the shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking. They hadn't been figments of my imagination. They had been real. I stepped back, my legs trembling. The weight of this realization almost too much to bear. The walls of the room seemed to close in on me, the air thickening with that same oppressive presence I had felt earlier. I wanted to run, to escape, but there was nowhere to go. This wasn't something I could outrun. It was something that had been with me all along. And then, the final message appeared on the screen. "Come home, John. It's time to remember." The words struck me like a physical blow. The laptop's screen flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw an image. A house, not unlike the one I was in, but not the same. It was a place I recognized, a place I had once called home, long before I could understand what that word truly meant. The memory hit me like a flood, washing away the years of denial. I had lived here, not in this house, but somewhere like it. As a child, before my family had moved, I had lived in a place that had felt wrong, even then. The whispers, the shadows, they had started there, growing louder and stronger as I grew older. But we had left, moved away, and I had convinced myself that it had all been a dream, a product of an overactive imagination. I had forgotten about it, pushed it deep into the recesses of my mind where it couldn't hurt me anymore. But now it had found me again. It had never really left. Tears welled up in my eyes as the truth became clear. The dark web, the messages, the man who had followed me, they were all connected to this, to a past I had tried so hard to forget. This was about more than just stalking or threats. This was something deeply personal, something tied to the very core of who I was. I had to confront it. I couldn't keep running from it, not anymore. Whatever it was, whether it was a part of me or something that had attached itself to me, I had to face it head on. I had to remember. With a deep breath, I took one last look at the laptop. The screen had gone completely dark now, the presence in the room growing stronger with every passing second. I could feel it all around me, in the walls, in the air, even in the floor beneath my feet. It was waiting for me to take the next step, to acknowledge its existence, to let it in. And I did. I let the memories flood back, the fear, the whispers, the shadows. I let myself remember the house, the nights spent wide awake, listening to things that shouldn't have been there. I let myself feel the terror that had gripped me as a child, the terror that I had tried so hard to forget. But with the fear came something else, understanding. This thing, this presence, had always been a part of my life, but it didn't want to harm me. It wanted to be acknowledged, to be remembered. It was a part of me, something that had been with me all along, and all it wanted was to come home. As I stood there letting the memories wash over me, the oppressive presence began to change. It softened, the darkness in the room lifting just slightly. The whispers that had once filled me with dread now seemed almost comforting, like a lullaby I had forgotten. I wasn't afraid anymore. I understood now. I took a deep breath and whispered into the silence, "I remember." And just like that, the presence faded away. The room was quiet again, the air clear and still. The laptop screen flickered back to life one last time, showing nothing but a blank desktop. The game was over, the threat gone. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone. I never had been. The fear that had haunted me all my life wasn't something to be run from, but something to be faced, understood, and accepted. I walked out of the house, feeling lighter than I had in years. The night was still dark, the street still empty, but the oppressive weight that had been bearing down on me was gone. I didn't need to be afraid anymore. As I drove away, leaving that house and all its memories behind, I realized that I was finally free. Free from the fear, the shadows, the whispers. Free to live my life without the weight of the past holding me down. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw something that made me smile. A shadow just barely visible sitting quietly in the back seat watching over me. It wasn't menacing, wasn't threatening. It was just there, a reminder of what I had faced, of what I had overcome. And I knew then that it wasn't a curse, but a gift that had been with me all along. Finally, I was home.